Madam Chair, I put forward a motion to adopt the agenda as it has been presented and posted to board docs.
Thank you. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. Moving into presentations, we have Superintendent Grimsley with us.
I'm short. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. We are pleased to report that we have had a smooth, successful first month of school at RCPS. Students and staff are thrilled to be back together and are already working really hard getting back to a more rigorous academic structure. The state has raised the bar for education and made some changes to the way we measure growth and assess mastery of content. Again, it happens in education quite frequently. So we'll be implementing many of these changes this year. Even with the changes, RCPS remains fully accredited, and we will continue to work diligently to remain so. We are very excited to learn this month that we were the sole recipients in the state of Virginia of a federal USDA Healthy Meals Incentive Grant. These grant funds will be used over the next 2 years to update cafeteria kitchen equipment to better prepare nutritionally rich meals in a more expedient manner, purchase a hoop house for on-site growing of herbs and vegetables to serve in our cafeteria, enrich our farm-to-table program, and bring on board a local farmer and chef, Brian Volmrick, to provide in-house training to cafeteria staff to further enhance efficiency in scratch-made meal preparation, provide monthly taste testing opportunities for students, and incorporate feedback from students and families to create healthier menus that emphasize locally sourced foods. The RCHS Peer Mentor Program is gearing up for a fun and enriching year as well. On August 30th, students who applied and were accepted to be peer mentors gathered for a fun-filled training day at the Northern Virginia 4-H Center in Front Royal. Starting in September, the mentors and their assigned mentees will participate in monthly activities to promote relationship building and learning life skills from the Health Rocks curriculum. We are grateful for our peer mentors who truly do play a vital role in supporting our 8th graders as they transition to the high school environment. Fall sports are well underway for our Panthers. All of our coaches and student athletes are working diligently toward the success of our programs. Athletic Director Coach Courtney Atkins was especially excited to report that our theater, one act, and competition cheer teams are back. Thank you to Ms. Seeley for being the director for our one act team and Kylan Witt for coaching the competition cheer team. Both teams will be participating in VHSL competitions this year. Fall teams, JP, JV, and varsity volleyball, JP and varsity football, varsity golf, JP and varsity cross country, JP and varsity sideline cheer, varsity competition cheer, and one act theater. So that's a lot for the fall in such a small school. And the Panther schedule of events I've attached to this report, and it's also on our website, so we invite you to come to those events. Also, I've included the division-wide calendar for your convenience, so you can see all of the events, and join us whenever you're available to cheer on the Panthers. They're doing so well already. Next week, the school board will meet at 6:30 p.m. on Tuesday, September 12th to discuss preliminary accreditation results, the revised student code of conduct, and showcase the new RCHS library where our meeting will take place. We will also share a special spotlight from the high school led by Principal Stewart. We thank you so much for your continuous support of the school system. We could not be nearly as successful as we have been without that support. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions for me?
Superintendent, thank you as always for coming to update us on the school. I wasn't here in person for our August meeting because had I been, I would have asked this question. Why does it seem that school is starting earlier and earlier every year? And I say that as a child who went to public schools my entire life and always went after Labor Day. What has happened to summer? Because I feel like summer is important for children. And starting in early August just caught me off guard.
Well, we've been doing it for quite some time, for, I want to say 13, 14 years now. So for us, it's not been too drastic of a change, but I do remember that initial transition where there was really only like a 4 to 6 week summer, and it was a quick turnaround. But instructionally, there's a lot of purpose for that so that you can finish a semester's worth of coursework, assess your winter break, come back with fresh content, whereas the later start usually has that break, and then you have to come back and hope everybody remembered everything, assess on your statement. It's just instructionally sound to do a little bit earlier, so most school divisions in Virginia are switching to that earlier start.
And I know you're providing or have provided a school calendar, so what will the last day of school be in 2024?
Oh, I'd have to look.
Spring 2024?
Probably like May 20.
Okay, so it's somewhat of a shift.
Right.
You're not into June.
We're out earlier.
It's usually like the Wednesday before
Okay.
Memorial Day, right?
Correct.
And then graduation is on that Friday.
Exactly right.
Okay, if I haven't been paying attention for 13 years, I apologize. But, it really caught me off guard this year. It just seems so darn early. My other question, I saw somewhere, maybe in the newspaper, that your count of out-of-county students who are now enrolled in the system, I believe the number was 53. And what I understand is those 53 students, their families must pay into the system by way of tuition reimbursement. Is that correct?
They can, unless they're on tuition waiver, and there's provisions set by policy about that as well.
Okay, so let's go round numbers, 50 students. How many of those would be on tuition waivers?
Almost all of them.
Okay. And why is that?
They either work in the county, provide a service to the schools, or own land in the county and pay taxes.
Okay, and that might obviate the need for me to ask this next question, and that was what kind of revenue effect do those out-of-county students who are, all things being equal, required to pay into the system, what kind of effect is that having in terms of your local ask for school support?
Well, that's a great question. So before we actually assess any applications for waiver, we solidify our local numbers first. So it's really empty seats within those grade levels that we're looking at. So let's say somebody applies for tuition waiver, has a third grader and a sixth grader. I can only accept them first or consider their application if there's enough room in those seats. You're already paying for that teacher, there's enough room. So if you're paying for that empty seat, if you put a student in there, then you get ADM, whether they're in the county or not. So those are the only ones that we accept. They also have to be in good standing academically, behaviorally, no discipline records. So it's pretty low risk for us, and they have to reapply every year. So if numbers change locally, they have to reapply.
So would it be a fair summary assessment to say that the presence of out-of-county students in our system, given that all of them are receiving tuition waivers, have an indirect benefit in the sense that they increase the ADM numbers, which drives state funding? Is that?
That's a great, so yes, and to put it simply, like the General Assembly had a special session today. Both chambers voted through the bill 6001, which is considering our ADM at 666. We actually have an ADM closer to 756. So in that will increase the revenue that we get from that to such an extent that if those numbers stay stable, we likely will not need to ask the county for additional revenue to make ends meet for FY24, even with the 2% increase.
That was kind of where I was going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you're welcome.
No, but I mean, I think we all would agree that when you see tuition paying out-of-county students in the system at that level, which is approaching, we'll say 7 or 8% of the total daily enrollment, then there should be some beneficial effect and relief for the taxpayer locally.
Right, and until we get that supplemental basic aid from the state, this is a
Okay.
way to equalize that and offset the need for additional county revenue with what you would have been having to pay for anyway.
Okay, thank you.
It's possible that it could shift our LCI if it holds up a couple of years.
Right.
A hundredths decimal, but we'll take whatever it is, because the ADM is the denominator, so as that number gets small, the LCI goes up. So if we can make that number a little bigger, it might go down just a little bit.
I hope so.
The state aid number per student is not that much there, is it?
Well, and that's the long-term effect. If your ADM is up, like Mr. Curry was saying, you can change that denominator and then increase the amount more exponentially for your state allocation.
But what is the state allocation number?
So it can be between 5,000 and 8,000 a student, depending on the year of the biennium. So
That much?
it can be, yeah.
But what is it?
I'd have to calculate exactly now with the adjustments, it's gonna change.
I mean, if it can be 5,000 to 8,000, it could also be lower than that, right?
But it's still all value add that you wouldn't have gotten before.
I understand, but, I mean, if it requires us to pay for one employee, it doesn't balance out.
Well, and it
The
wouldn't,
salary and wages.
no, it would not, because, yeah, like I said, it was only,
Wages and
empty
benefits.
seats. You'd be paying for that person anyway. So these are only filling in empty seats. If they're, so I did have to deny some kindergarten applications. I'm sorry, I don't have room. That would require me to have another classroom and hire another teacher. We're sorry, we don't do that. So,
Maybe you don't, but it has happened.
Thank you, and it looks like you had a heck of a football game.
yes, so it's nailed it. It was on Friday night. It was a great game. So many people came out. It was like a homecoming crowd on our first home game. So that was wonderful.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's awesome. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McClay.
Next is the company 4 monthly report.
Thank you, I will be brief. So I wanted to publicly acknowledge and thank Alexa Morrison for her donation of an American flag for us to fly over the fire hall that had been flown over the United States Capitol. She presented that to us at our last meeting. We continue to operate without a chief. We appreciate the council allowing us to talk to two people that were interested in possibly taking leadership positions with the department, and including chief role, and giving feedback on that. And we look forward to the board assigning a new chief in the near future. In the meantime, Chief Todd Brown of Company 9 continues to, and his team continue to provide guidance, support, and training. He's very helpful to us. The fire levy board report is ready and complete and ready for presentation to the upcoming fire levy board meeting, and we'll see what happens there. It's been reviewed by the chiefs. We voted in 12 new members at our last membership meeting. Very pleased to be able to report that. Volunteers continue to navigate the application and affiliation process and will be voted for membership as they complete that process. We've got 5 more tonight that we look forward to being read in as candidates for membership. So the first step of our 3-step process, instead of crawl, walk, run, as was presented to you last summer, we are refocusing on recruit, train, and then gain experience and gain certification qualifications. In coordination with Company 9, we've been continuing to have apparatus and equipment training. We've got several members who signed up for EVOC, that's the Emergency Vehicle Operations course, being able to drive the different pieces of equipment. That will be at the end of this month. And we also have members who will be participating in EMR training, which is like EMT light. They won't be EMTs. They'll be able to do some things that are health related, but they'll have credit for the hours they spend in EMR towards becoming EMTs. So I'm very excited that we're moving forward with that. Finally, radio communications training will be held this Friday with several members scheduled to attend. Just as an example, last week, at the very last minute, one of my fellow board members arranged for some EMS training at Company 9, and bang, we had 14 people there, just on short notice. Went running up, so the enthusiasm is there, and we're hoping to carry it forward. The runs, as consistent with our approach of recruit and train, we de-emphasized taking runs. So in August, there were 4 responses and 20 non-responses to EMS calls, which is the flip of what we had in July. On the fire side, we had 7 responses and 4 non-responses. I think that will probably continue as we get more people on board and certified. We're going to improve those numbers as well. Questions?
I mean, I have a question. I watched with great interest your most recent meeting, and there seemed to be an impediment to the firefighters getting the fire engine out because there were materials locked up in a box in the ambulance in the bay, and that the fire truck was not able to get out when the firefighters showed up to the station. That happened about an hour and 30 minutes into your most recent meeting in the video. And that was left as that there would be a resolution and you would get back to folks. Are you able to get the fire engine out now?
Well, not right now because it's in the shop. And it's being repaired. There was a lot of publicity about the damages. It's being repaired, but there were some other things. So we can't get that out. All I can do is look into that and try to get a report to the membership tonight on it. I remember there being some concern about getting the fire engine out because people who were legacy members hadn't affiliated with the county and therefore weren't supposed to come into the building. And we were talking about, well, could we drive it out and make it on board, workarounds like that. But at this point, no, we haven't got that fixed.
That's interesting because some of the same members go to like Company 9, Company 3, and they can go in those fire departments.
We are affiliated with the county because that's what we had to do.
Well, I understand that, but why would the county have a requirement like that?
It's a state requirement.
The county does not have a requirement. There is a, for lack of a better word, the older companies are grandfathered when they're combined EMS and fire. So Flint Hill is not a grandfathered combined EMS and fire agency. Rappahannock County Fire Department is a new EMS agency. We are not grandfathered.
And
So it is state law, and as long as those older members in those other companies, they might remain grandfathered, but not for
Do you know what section of the code it is?
I can certainly provide you with the
Yeah, I'd be
documentation.
very curious
Yeah.
to see that too.
Because I tried to do a search, but I mean, there's lots of things. There's
Yeah,
whole
we,
books written about computers that I haven't read yet.
Sure, but by the time you read them, they won't matter anymore. It's
Right.
different features. Myself and Mr. Stevens and Mr. Polster, we've all worked pretty hard on that with the Office of EMS and had conversations with Mr. Layton about that and trying to find ways that we could justify working alongside that in a way that wouldn't require everybody to affiliate. We were unable to find any way to do that.
if I may add, thank you both. Our temporary coordinator, Mr. Stevens, at our request, called the state to see if there was a way that we could avoid that. And the answer was basically no, we have to do it.
So how long will the engine be in the shop?
Gosh, I don't know. I would hope not long. We have, they had the parts for it, and they had to do some other things, like a light had gotten knocked off, you know, just when we're out at night, that sort of thing. I'm expecting it back within a week. I'll risk that.
Okay.
Maybe just days.
If you could update the board and let us know when it's back in service, that would be great.
Sure, we can send an email
To the whole board.
okay,
BOS@rappahannockcountyva.gov
okay.
or to Mr. Gary and he'll
I
make
can,
sure
I
to
can
get it.
commit to that.
There seems to be a disconnect somewhere between things coming in and not getting to all board members at the same time.
Okay, if you have things like that that you want to see that I can provide, we are fully committed to transparency, so whatever you need, let me know and we'll make sure you get it.
Could you talk a little bit about the interviews you've done for prospective chiefs? Because I'm not aware of that at all.
Sure. We had actually asked as a board to be involved, and we appreciate the council allowing us to be. And because we can't function and do business as a board, because we don't have 5 directors, which is a quorum according to the old bylaws, we had to do it on an individual basis. So in 1s and 2s, we interviewed the 2 people, talked with them, and we can then make individual recommendations based on that. And one board member has not talked with one person, but everybody else has talked with both. Just, is that responsive, Ms. Smith?
I mean, this is the first I've heard of you all interviewing people and making a recommendation to us and that you had specific individuals in mind. So, I mean, I'm very curious to know too what your approach is because I asked Mr. Curry for Mr. Gerald's letter of resignation And there was really no indication what drove his resignation. And so what kind of criteria are you considering that you may have learned in our first attempt to do this? Because as a board member, I think that's a critical piece of my decision-making mechanism.
I think both we and the potential candidates learned something from that experience, because both of them wanted reassurance that they would get support, they could delegate, and they wouldn't be running all the calls themselves all the time, which Dave Jones was doing, God bless him. And that was a big part of what we talked about. Management styles, how they would work with new members. One of the things that has happened with the influx of new members, a varied group of people, different backgrounds from all over the place. And so we're going to need a chief and people in leadership that can work with people who come from those varied backgrounds. These are not all Rappahannock County natives.
And in your criteria for chief, are you actually taking into account also geographical proximity to the fire station? Because I think that was a challenge that very few people acknowledged the first time around. But having, to get a piece of apparatus out in 8 minutes and you live 12 to 15 minutes away from the fire station, that's not, the math doesn't add up.
I agree.
I did not personally take that into account. We were mainly looking at things like certifications, experience, those sorts of things. But I appreciate the point.
Well, I hope you'll take it into thorough consideration because time matters. And time matters to me probably more than experience.
If we get somebody inexperienced to you faster, I don't know that that's going to help as much as somebody that gets to you a couple minutes later that knows what they're doing. But I take your point.
And there's a certain level of expertise where I would argue pick the closest person because minutes matter.
I interpret you as saying above a threshold of expertise.
That's correct.
Okay, I understand you. Let me just say, we're making recommendations. The call is yours as to who's going to be the chief.
But why do you feel like you can't elect your own chief?
Our previous chief was appointed by you January 26th of this year. And my understanding was that same procedure would be followed, at least to fill out the remainder of our appointment, which ends January 26, 2024.
But you have bylaws in place for your own station that enable you to elect the chief. So why aren't you electing a chief?
We have tried to follow the bylaws as best we can, but that sort of decision, I think, was taken out of our hands by county council.
I would disagree. And I would think if you're a group of people and you're trying to form your leadership committee, it's best to look amongst yourselves. Nobody knows you better than you know yourselves.
No.
I think the last question, just, I don't mean to interrupt, but just, I think it'd be helpful if we hear from Mr. Goff regarding the applicability of the resolution. Art, did you hear the question?
I think I understand. The
Okay.
question was, why aren't they electing their own chief instead of the board appointing? It's because the 26th of January resolution, the board voted to take that power and wield it individually, as the board, as permitted by that code section 27-8 on 13. And so as I understand it, that resolution hasn't been rescinded or voted down. And it also calls for the board to make the appointment in the event that the chief appointed then should resign.
But I think the judge made some decisions or pronouncements about the organization of Company 4. And in terms of the state code and how we're proceeding with this, does that follow along with the judge's opinion?
Yeah, the court ruled entirely in our favor on that lawsuit. And the court ruled that the board had that power to make those appointments of the chief and the officers pursuant to that code section. Now, there was a in dicta remark from Judge Plowman that, of course, they have to follow Fleming. It was Fleming. No, it wasn't. It was Plowman. It was Judge Plowman at one of the pretrial hearings where he said, of course, they have to follow the bylaws. But that was in reference to Mr. Connick asking him to put in the order of that proceeding that they shall follow the bylaws. But that was an aside, it didn't affect the court's holding on what was actually before it. That was just an aside thing that came up. It had nothing to do with whether the board has the power under 2713 to appoint a chief and officers.
So under 2713, it's your opinion that we have the processes in place to appoint a chief?
Yeah, the resolution for the 26 spells that out in some detail. And that's of course what happened, that was what was challenged in the circuit court. And as of now, the board won the day. The court ruled that, yes indeed, 2713 did vest this board with the power to do that. So I don't think that has anything to do with, as far as bylaws like electing members and so on, that doesn't go that far, I don't think. All it went to was election or appointment of the chief and officers.
I would think, I can't speak for my colleague, but I would think that since that did not go very well, that we might want to let the fire company elect their own chief if they're discussing that amongst yourselves.
That's policy for you guys. I'm just a lawyer. I just tell you what the law is.
But the way that you just spoke at the beginning of what you were explaining is that because of that resolution, we have to give it to you.
Unless you change the resolution, which you're free to do.
And we approved that resolution, as you recall, on a 3-2 vote. The resolution ties to statute 27-13 directly, and the resolution basically spells out the form,
I understand
the
that.
form of the authority we're taking. And
I don't know why we would have to continue with that when it didn't work out very well the first
well,
time. It's not debatable. We don't have a chief.
well,
So it's
that's not debatable, but what is debatable is whether that resolution is or is not in effect, and it is still in effect. So.
Well, I guess I do wonder when I read the letter of resignation, it just said, I'm resigning subsequent to our personal conversation, and so I would like to know why a board appointee resigned.
That's it. I thought we're conflating several things here. I thought the question at hand was whether or not the current board members should elect their own chief. We're still talking about that.
Well, but
But
then
you're
we
talking
moved
about a
around to the first
transparency
time
issue.
it didn't go very well. And so I'm wondering, I don't have any insight because it was a two-way conversation as to what is considered to not have gone very well, so that maybe we can make better decisions going forward.
I think that was Mr. Frazier's comment that it hasn't gone very well because the chief that we appointed resigned.
And then I made my comment after him, so I think it was.
Okay, so I think we can all accept that there's not a chief at Company 4 currently. We can also accept that we have a binding resolution tied to our authority under 2713, with which Judge Fleming ruled was an appropriate exercising of our authority as a local governing body. So I don't think we're debating the facts. We need a chief, the resolution stands, the judge ruled in our favor. So I would say that the decision is in fact ours, unless we were to take a vote on the resolution that currently stands and somehow alter that resolution. I voted for the resolution, so.
I know, and I appreciate your speaking quite some length about this, but I'm just simply saying that someone gave a resignation that was a board appointee, and as a member of the board who didn't personally vote for that appointee, but the board made that appointment, I would like to know why they resigned, because that was not included in the letter of resignation.
The Chief Gerald
I
has.
appreciate what you're saying, Dan, but I think our chairman knows the answer to my question.
Well, I would just like to say this for the record. Chief Gerald has no obligation to tell us why he resigned. And secondly, I would like to thank Dr. Hill for the efforts you guys have done at Company 4 in furthering rehabilitating that company. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that this line of questioning, while I think is legitimate, I do not appreciate the tone in the sense that this is not an inquisition.
No, it's not an
These folks are
inquisition.
here to help the
I asked a
council.
very simple question.
And I'm going to be very clear about this. Chief Gerald does not need to give a reason for his resignation.
He did give a reason,
He
but
did
he
a
only
reason.
gave
I'm saying
the
he doesn't
chairman.
need to. I didn't hear one, and you know what? He's an individual citizen. He can quit, he can walk away.
But now having made that mistake, whatever the mistake was, we don't know because we aren't privy to the information. Wouldn't you like to avoid making it again?
I don't view it as a mistake.
We haven't had a chief for a month and a half.
Well,
They're on dual dispatch every day for fire and EMS. How do you think we didn't make a mistake?
I think they were on dual dispatch.
Point of order, Madam
Chair.
Chair. Point
If
of
they didn't have an EMS license,
Point of
we did
order.
it in
Madam
January.
Chair, point of order.
Hold on, please. Yes, sir.
Why do we find it so nearly impossible to discuss public business in public?
You're in public. We're
We're
discussing.
having a great discussion.
But these two gentlemen are now trying to sidetrack the question that my colleague asked.
It's a very simple question.
He gave you, I believe, maybe he didn't, but you were privy to a conversation with him a month prior to the resignation. It wasn't shared with the board.
And
Ms. Smith had to ask for the resignation letter. This is like, this end of the table always has to make FOIA requests of the county administrator to find out what the other three supervisors are doing.
And I would just like to add that while I appreciate that there may be a private matter, and if you'd like to speak to me outside of the meeting, I recognize that people have public and private lives, and there might not be something for the public record. But this has been a major problem. It has only gotten worse. The response times and calls that were just read out indicate how much worse it has gotten. Why can't I ask a simple question about why someone resigned?
you can, it's just that it could be indiscreet in the sense that people are
And the
allowed.
other part of my question,
Ms.
excuse
Smith, I won't
me,
interrupt you if you don't.
go right
interrupt me.
ahead. I'll let you finish and then I'll conclude my remarks.
I will continue to let you speak without interrupting.
I defer to you, Mr. Carney. You
So
were
I was
insistent
gonna
on
say-
speaking.
Okay. I was going to say that it can be indiscreet when somebody might have a private reason for resigning.
Yes. Which someone could have called me.
Where you can call that.
I didn't have the reason either. I'm just saying that when people step up to do something and then they resign, and I don't know the reason, and it could be a very personal reason.
Yes.
I'm suggesting that I don't view it as a mistake insofar as I view just moving forward. You know, you can think of a myriad scenarios where it's not a mistake in the sense that he had some crisis happen.
And
He
I'm
couldn't
not
do it.
faulting Chief.
But that wouldn't
Mr.
mean,
Gerald at all.
let me just finish. That wouldn't mean that we made a mistake.
I-
It means that something befell him and he had to resign.
We did make a mistake because we put all our eggs in one basket. And I'm not finding fault with Mr. Gerald because I thought this board tasked him with an impossible task to begin with. But my final point is, there was a private conversation made at the beginning of July between our chairman and Mr. Gerald, who at the time was serving as chief as Company 4. And he apparently gave her some reasons for which, if things didn't change or happen in the future, it sounded like if things went a certain way, he was going to tender his resignation. And then subsequent to that, he tendered his resignation in writing. And I am just simply wanting to know why, if there are things that happen in the course of our first appointment that we should avoid in making our second appointment, why can't I know those things?
Thank you for the opportunity to address that. When we announced his resignation, we very deliberately began the message by saying, for his own reasons, which we believe were good and sufficient. We, as other board members, are not privy to those reasons. We've speculated about them, and maybe too much so. And I have alluded to that speculation, and perhaps I shouldn't have, in that he gave of himself unstintingly, went on all the calls, was on 24/7 for weeks at a time. And if there was a mistake in the process once he came on board, right, it was that we pushed to get up and running too quick before we had more support for him. Viewed ex ante before his appointment, we were very excited about it. It seemed all positive. It seemed like a good idea. There were no warnings, as far as we could see, that this would happen. I think it develops later. Does that help at all?
If that's what happened, that could have been said publicly.
It could have been said publicly.
Yes, sir.
Well, do you think I should have? Because I didn't know that for sure. I thought
Well,
all I
like I
could
said,
do was
if that's what
suggest
happened,
it.
if that's what happened, that should be said publicly so that that can be something that we try to work around or avoid the next time we make a decision.
I personally believe that had a lot to do with it.
Well, and I think you're right, because it was asking too much of one person. It always was, in my opinion. And that's something I said before that resolution was adopted.
And that's why, as we talked with the two candidates, we talked a lot about delegating and supporting and making sure that they were not going to be expected, I mentioned that earlier, not going to be expected to do it all themselves.
And the other thing that I really hope you all will take into consideration as we move forward is what you should count as a response. Because I do believe that just showing up with an apparatus and not being able to really do anything should not be counted as a response. Really, you should consider not responding, because every call you run, if you get there and you can't do anything, it costs money.
There's some feeling agreeing with you on the board. That's part of why the number of responses have dropped. We have to, under the current circumstances, wait for 1,400 to get there before we can do anything or help at all, because we don't have a medical.
Right. And I certainly want responses from you all, but I want meaningful responses.
So do we. Thank you for your
Thank you.
help and support in getting there.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Dr. Hill.
Thank you all.
Dr. Hill.
Thank you, Dr. Hill.
All right, I think we have Mr. Nedved.
Hold on one second. Mr. Sharp?
You'll be back. You're coming back.
I have to fix something up for you. I'll be right back.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me this afternoon to present my quarterly reports. I think you can take this in a good way. It's not a whole lot to report. We've had, a lot of our work is driven by weather conditions up here with the gravel road maintenance and vegetation. And we've been able to, because of the weather conditions, pretty much stick to routine maintenance activities and grading, keeping gravel road. I think our probably dust has probably been this year. We've been finding the dust complaints and gravel road complaints and vegetation. And we're on our second mowing cycle. We completed our second primary route mowing cycle. One notable accomplishment this summer, recently, was that we replaced the 3 culverts on Sycamore Drive, Sycamore Road over Pine River, which was a designated trout stream. And we were able to do that in 4 days. We had a 24-hour, 2 12-hour shift crews. We completed that in 4 days. And, weather was excellent for us, and we had no issue. Equipment work. Everybody did their part, and so we were happy that we could get that job completed. But a couple other things I wanted to make note of. Besides that project was we met last night with the Board of Supervisors, the Public Safety Committee, and talked about a couple of issues. And one of them was bridge postings. Whenever we have a bridge, we have a bridge inspection team that inspects all our bridges on annual or biannual basis. And there are 4 bridges in Rappahannock County that are currently posted. And of course, that's subject to change as we go through inspections, but current 4 bridges now are Route 622, which is Harris Hollow, Route 618, which is Rawlins Road, Route 637, which is South Hose, North Hose, it's one of those, and 675. I can call the number 675. But those are 4 roads that have bridges that are posted, and the one on Harris Hollow has an emergency vehicle posting, which is an extra category that was required by law for us to evaluate the ability of the bridge to hold up emergency vehicles that have different weight classifications than standard commercial vehicles. So that one is the only one of the 4 that has an emergency vehicle posted. Of 29 tons per axle, the Harris, the normal rating is 22 tons. And then 618 has a 12-ton rating, 637 has an 11-ton rating, and 675 has a 5-ton rating. The 618 is the most recently posted bridge. It has been posted earlier this year, Rollins Road. Our bridge designers are going to assess that bridge in the next 6 months to determine a potential repair or replacement project that would bring it back up to standard and remove the posting. We won't know until that assessment is completed what that project will look like and when it will be scheduled. So right now, currently there are no bridge repair or replacement scheduled in Rappahannock County for the next 2 years. So that is reassessed on an annual basis, and I will communicate that to the board if that changes.
Excuse me, is that Rolling Road? Do you have a title?
I think it's Rollins.
Rollins Ford?
Yeah, it's 618.
Not sure what the number.
Already,
Rollins. There's a Rolling Road, then there'll be Rollins Ford Road.
Maybe Holland Road.
Holland.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
there you go,
Okay.
that makes sense.
I got my H and my R missing.
That is, I was thinking that might be 675, so I remember when it went up.
But,
And it's right in the middle of Holland.
Yeah. But anyway, I'm gonna, I just did put this together this morning real quick after our meeting, and I will get this formally prepared and sent to you so y'all have that information. Going forward.
So the Board of Supervisors, what role can they play in the scheduling of rehabilitation of these bridges?
They're really, it's a department's responsibility to maintain the bridges and respect the bridges. As far as priorities, they're based on a district with our state, with the secondary road bridges are based on a district priority, based on the resources available. There are SDR funds, which are state of good repair funds that are typically for entire line roads. I think 612 may be a candidate for that at some point. It's strictly a state responsibility to prioritize bridges. But if you have a preference, certainly as a board, you can make that preference.
The one of the group that you identified, one bridge that concerns me the most, and Mr. Nick brought it to my attention, he's a member of the Public Safety Committee, is on 622, about 3 miles outside the town of Washington. And the emergency services effect of that bridge, particularly in the case of a fire where you might need a tanker beyond that bridge, the effect is that any house beyond that bridge, so basically everything all the way up to the top of Harris Hollow Road would have to be serviced by way of Gid Brown Hollow, which, as you know, has a wonderful gravel combination that is very narrow. So I'm most worried about the emergency vehicle weight limit on that bridge in particular. So if we can somehow short circuit, and I know VDOT loves terms like short circuit the bureaucracy, but 2 years is a long time to get that bridge on the roster once needing repair. So I think selfishly, and also because it is directly affecting public safety in that hollow, we need to make that a priority.
Sure. And I did have a specific discussion with the bridge engineer on that, and that it is rated, they have like 4 levels, good, fair, 4, 5, excellent, good, fair, and 4. It is rated in a fair condition, and in that reason, it's based on a district-wide level. It's not in the current plan because it is, even though it is posted, it's still in a fair condition. If the board would like to make its wishes known as far as making that a priority district-wide, you certainly can do that.
I would suggest we get your definitive report and the board can compare all those. We know that North Pose is, there's no interest by the residents to provide the right of access to allow that project to move forward, so that's kind of off the list. But the other 3 should be compared and contrasted so they can make an informed decision.
Sure, I will get that report to you, and then we can go from there.
We were going to get that information to dispatch as well, so everyone with mental equipment could and could not pass over that bridge.
I'll make sure it is.
Yeah. And we also had a conversation about Route 211, long way drivers, and we're, based on some information provided by your sheriff's office dispatch, as far as call outs, and that we've kind of looked at that, and the locations where it seems like it's the most call outs have been, we're looking at those. We're going to work with our traffic engineering section and try to come up with some potential countermeasures for that, and suggestions made that maybe we can do a pilot, location, and see if that's something, study it and see if that changes, what's going on out there. So we'll certainly, work towards that, and we'll be in communication on that.
And a lot of people here are here to talk about our sign ordinance, and during our public safety meeting last night, I mentioned as soon as we start talking about more signs to solve, a safety problem, we also have to pause and think whether that's going to be effective. And you brought up the idea of possible roadway painting. Is something as simple as arrows pointing in the correct direction at certain crossovers, maybe in that pilot area. So if we could try that, if we deem that as an acceptable and effective means without putting up a bunch more signs and desensitizing voters.
Well, we'd be happy to, come up with some potential solutions and come back to your
Great.
safety committee and present that and go from there.
I think we had a good discussion last night, and I appreciate you and Mr. Burke coming out.
Yeah, it's good.
Good, thank you.
The only question I have, I know we had to look at 610 and 686, both Chester Gap and Blue Ridge Avenue, for repaving, and I think it's on the schedule for like 2025.
Yes.
The big concern that seems to be what I'm hearing is the reflectors, especially when it's foggy. They joke about in the past they had to get somebody on top of the hood to be able to tell the person driving if they needed to go left or go right. I really am concerned that they make sure they have the safety they need up there for driving down that road that could be icy at the same time or something. So anything we can do to help with the roads up there that, I don't know, Chief Brown said 20 years ago they were paved, so I'm hoping we can get them on the schedule.
Well, 25 will be here before you know it.
I do know that, but anything you can do to help with those two specifically.
And I just wanted to thank David Jenkins for his effort on the 2 maintenance paving requests I had on 622, and he got on those right away. Those were potholed areas that were really deteriorating quickly, and I know that 622 is not on the paving schedule for quite a while. So.
Not currently, but I think we appreciate that. And I'll let them do that.
No, he's super responsive, and everyone has called me and said thank you.
One other thing I'd like to bring up is that we do have a section of 522 between 211 and Main Street is in a resurfacing program for either the next year or the following year, but there will be some pedestrian crossing there, and we'll be doing some ADA improvements on the side of that in advance of that, so there will be something coming up in that area.
Mark, if we want to do cameras for speed deterrence, like when this highway project is going on this summer, it seems like we may have missed an opportunity in posting cameras there. Is that something that we would coordinate with you all? Because it's a construction zone, we can't post cameras?
The law was passed last year, or came into effect this year, passed last year, and it is only could be used based on the law in a school zone or in a construction zone. And it's administered by a law enforcement entity, so it could either be local law enforcement or state police. And certainly we'll partner with either one if they want to pursue a project, but it has to be in a school zone or in a construction zone. We were doing a pilot project, it hasn't got off the ground yet, but we're doing a pilot project with state police where we're doing various interstate construction projects first and kind of see what happens and what the learn lessons are from those.
And part of our construction zone this year was, of course, our school zone. And I don't know about the other members of the board, but I've seen some really questionable driving tactics through that area this summer, and wished that we had cameras, because I feel like we could have probably, somebody could have made some money issuing tickets, and it probably would have slowed people down.
Well, it's, the devil's in the details with that law. It's a lot of moving parts to making that work and work legally, so. I'll need to get
Mr.
Mr.
County
Goff and,
Attorney.
Mr. Goff and the sheriff talking together and see whether that's something y'all want to do.
Well, I don't know how the rest of the board feels, and we should probably just refer it to the, or ask the members of the Public Safety Committee to put it up for consideration. But I wish we had it this summer, and I think we should think about doing it in the future. And I really do feel for your contractors who've been out there. I know it's been a lot to manage, and people aren't always very respectful. And those people don't live in Rappahannock County, so, I mean, if they would stay around longer, we could help them figure it out. But thanks for your help too with Sycamore Ridge Road and that project, and please keep me up to date on Water Street.
I don't want to put you on the spot, and I normally say that just before I put somebody on the spot. But do you know if that school zone is during school hours of operation, or is, so it wouldn't matter on a weekend? They wouldn't be able to get in?
Or outside of the school active zone.
That's what I figured.
But if the school has activities going on, like Friday night football games,
Yeah, probably.
Saturday basketball activities.
I have had preliminary conversations with the sheriff on it, and there's, it's preliminary, but I think generally she's supportive, and she said that people still do speed when her deputies are positioned there to assist with traffic.
Oh, sure.
So,
I mean, it was on the weekend, it was a Sunday, 2-3 weeks ago now, but right in that school zone in front of the high school, a car went around me, I'm doing the speed limit, and it was gone, it was out of sight. And the wife swears it was the car that the deputies had pulled over up there, up above, by the barber shop.
Yeah.
So, hopefully they got it, I mean, they were probably traveling close to 100 miles an hour by the time I last saw sight of them.
I know the sheriff's department and local state troopers have been patrolling a lot this summer, but it just seems like they really have their hands full, especially with those construction zones.
the way many of those programs work is a vendor will provide equipment and administer nearly the entirety of the program, possibly with civil penalties for a cut of the fine revenue.
That's what I was gonna ask, is who bears the burden of the cost?
Well, I don't think that we really need to worry about the revenue, as long as we get enough to, somebody to, you know, reimburse the cost of those cameras, we need to stop the problem. Just like with the, you know, wrong way driving.
There are people who I know would love to do business with you.
They're coming out of the woodwork these days to assist localities
Thanks.
in this regard.
Well, thank you. That's Mark.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Appreciate it.
All right, at this time, we're gonna open up to public comment. Anyone wishing to speak, given the number of people in the room, we're gonna keep it at 5 minutes or less. Please raise your hand, be recognized, and let us know your district, and give us what you're thinking at the moment. Yes, ma'am.
Diane Bruce, Piedmont District. I'm here about the sign ordinance. You concluded your public hearing at your August meeting, and it's on the agenda today for discussion, I think. And I'm hoping that you don't vote on anything today. I hope that you will consider some of the comments that were made at the last meeting about what some of us think needs to be done. I feel that the proposed ordinance loosens all regulations. Art is carved out, there's no definition. I wouldn't want you to expand temporary signs or commercial signs. I would like for size and location and lighting to keep reasonable standards and to apply to all signs. The current ordinance, in my opinion, does a better job than the proposed ordinance. We've lived with the current ordinance for many years, and it seems to be doing a pretty good job, I think. The Berkeley group that you hired to assist with this ordinance and the other ordinances made lots of recommendations. I can't find very many of them in the proposed ordinance, but they don't line up with the way it was presented in the birthday report. So today, I would like to give you a letter addressed to you, and I believe all of you have already received this letter by email. It contains a number of signatures from all over the county addressing concerns about signs. So I would ask you to not make any decisions today, but perhaps to schedule some meetings, more than one, where we can perhaps have roundtable discussions, or we can have back and forth discussions. I know when you come to a public comment section, you're not going to answer any questions I might have. That's the way it is, and I understand that. But I think it would be helpful, and we could probably compromise on things if we could have something more like roundtable or open meetings. I will give these signatures in this letter, the originals of them, to Mr. Curry, and I would assure you that these are all original signatures by the people who signed it. There are no signatures here that were signed by other people or people from outside of the community. So please consider no votes today, scheduling some other meetings. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
I apologize, I thought this had been emailed to the board, but it wasn't, so I'll have to bring it in now. Rick Kohler, Jackson District. I'm speaking on behalf of the Rappahannock League for Environmental Protection, for which I am president, and an organization that was formed in 1970 and still continues today in the county. To the Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors. Rappahannock County Comprehensive Plan 2020 contains the following language, originally written in 1989 as the, quote, cornerstone of the comprehensive plan and from which all zoning must flow. Quote, we the people of Rappahannock County declare it to be a scenic county, and all goals, principles, and policies will reflect and evolve from this fundamental recognition. A scenic county shall mean one in which preservation and enhancement of the natural and historic beauty and cultural value of the countryside shall be respected as being of foremost importance. Comprehensive Plan Goal Number 1, preserve the overall viewshed of the county in its unspoiled, natural setting, which gives it special character and identity, end quote. RLEP submits that the Rappahannock County zoning ordinances must follow and align with the comprehensive plan. The proposed revision of the sign ordinance is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. Temporary signs, number, size, and duration should follow and align with the comp plan. The current ordinance allows one temporary sign per lot for up to 30 days, while the proposed revised ordinance allows 5 temporary signs per lot for up to 200 days. This change opens the door to a potential glut of signage marring our roads, our scenic county, and its viewsheds. Hay bale signs should be treated like other temporary signs and restricted as to their number, size, and duration. The proposed revised ordinance allows a sign of up to 25 round hay bales to remain in place for 200 days. This violates the comprehensive plan. Plastic-covered white hay bale signs stacked as big as billboards do not preserve Rappahannock's historic beauty and cultural value. Materials for signs should prohibit dancing balloon-style signs, signs with motion, lights that flash, blink, change, or are not down-shielded with their lighting. Contemporary styles are not in keeping with our historic beauty and cultural value. Lighting for signs should be down-shielded to avoid light trespass onto neighboring properties and into the night skies. Our rare, unobstructed view of the stars is an aspect of Rappahannock's natural beauty to be preserved. Geopolitical flags, a term that is undefined, should be restricted in size and height with dark sky lighting standards. The proposed ordinance allows any size or height with no lighting standards. This fails to follow comprehensive plan goal number 1. We urge the supervisors to rethink this ordinance, which is the beginning of the upcoming full update of the entire county zoning ordinances. Please ensure Rappahannock County maintains its special character and identity. Thank you for preserving Rappahannock.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Corrigan, question, Madam Chairman. How many people did you send this out to via email?
It went out to the members of our LEP.
Okay. And do you have any idea about how many people that is roughly?
I don't, but it's probably over 200.
Okay. And you were on the planning commission, well, I can't remember the years that you were an appointee.
I don't remember the exact years. I think I've been off for 2 years,
That was about
perhaps.
what I thought too.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, Sheila Bressinger, Hampton District. I just want to say something very briefly about Company 4. I had the opportunity to meet the chief who just resigned, and he was very enthusiastic and forward-looking, no blame game or anything like that. He was out at the farm when there was a huge wind and fire one weekend, and there were a whole lot of fires. And our farm was one of the ones that, thank God, the wind didn't go a certain way. But my whole thing, and I'll say it like this, years ago, when I was working, I used to be sent into a place to fix things, okay? I would go into a place that was a disaster, and I would have the support of everyone around me to be able to do my job and to be able to bring that particular organization forward to a place of success. And I was very happy about that. So here we had a person who accepted a position to go into a company that was apparently a mess. Through no fault of a lot of people, it just was. And so if you've ever had an injury and you have a Band-Aid on it, there comes a time when you have to rip the Band-Aid off. And it's painful and it hurts. But I think that's what the company was going through. And I think some people somehow were misguided and led astray. And so my opinion, that the lawsuit that came interfered with the success of that company going forward. And we would hear the fire chief say here, in conversation with people on the board, there were certain things he could not do. His hands were tied because of this lawsuit. So when people question the ability of this company to be going forward well, that person's hands were tied for quite a while. And I am so chagrined that that happened. However, we're in a place now where we can go forward, and this is a very critical organization that we have. The only victims here are not the people who were put aside for a while, it's all it was, till this thing could be put back together again like a puzzle. But the real victims are the people of our county who were then not able to be rescued or helped in distresses that happened. And so we have a chance to put this thing going forward. And I really would like to see everyone on this board fully behind this company's success going forward and giving their support to whoever is chosen to go forward. And I hope that prior members will also band together along with the new people and we'll come together to give us the success and the protection that this county needs.
Thank you, Sheila.
Yes.
My name is Sam Forback from the Wakefield District, live in Flint Hill. What she just said is true. People need to work together. One of the things that was brought up earlier was, how can we vote numbers in if we can't vote a chief in? So that lays on y'all's hands. According to the bylaws, we voted in 12 people last week or week before last. Great to have 12 more people, but we voted them in as contributing members. If you go by the bylaws, contributing members cannot run calls, they cannot be running apparatus, they are for administrative stuff only, not operational. Okay? So, in August, Mr. Hill talked about how many calls they had. They had 35 calls total. EMS was 24 calls. 20 of those, with nobody responded. Nobody. From Flint Hill. Just lucky we had other companies. The 4 that did go out was drivers only. So again, no trained people. The driver, he couldn't do anything because he couldn't get on the scene until an EMS person got there. So again, we're running an ambulance all over creation because we run them to slate meals, we run them all over the place, and they can't do anything when you get there. 4 calls, total was 11. 4 no response, 7 responses. With the 7 responses, they didn't have a trained crew. They had a driver and maybe a pump operator, but at least a driver, supposedly. That's in question. So it looks like for the month of August, the percentage of calls that are run was 31%. That's way, way below what you said we were doing what we had. So if we, those that don't know, I'm one of the legacy numbers of the fire department. So, Mr. Carney, you stated on the 26th that the board is responsible if people die. Mr. Whitson, you said that it's very important for the chain to survive. Ms. Donahue, you said that looking at the people's training, the name on the roster, and an individual actually trained and certified for internal firefighting, and know that they're reviewing the list of those who were actually certified, it was scary. So now we have nobody, 0. So we went from scary to what? You know, this was brought back by you guys. Not all of it, but you guys. So these are your quotes. So what are we going to do to make it so that you don't have to be worried people die? What are we going to do to make it chain of survival? What are we going to do about the training? Training takes months and months and months to get people trained in the EMS. We've already spent approximately 8 months, and we're still worse off than we were before. You know, if it wasn't for Washington, Amosville, Chester Gap, Covenant, Flint Hill, First Degree, we'll be in Flint Hill. They'd be in bad shape. I went to a call the other night because it was my stepson. And just lucky, Chester Gap showed up. Flint Hill didn't have anybody respond. So again, lucky it wasn't nothing bad. But what are we going to do when these people do start dying? And it's going to happen. People are going to die. It happens every day. So what are we going to do when it happens? What are we going to do when somebody's not there in 5 minutes or 8 minutes or 25 minutes, which the county says we're supposed to do? What's going to happen at that point? Okay. So my question to you guys, what's got better coming forward since January 26th? You've got an ambulance that can get out on the Rappahannock license with nobody trained. So it might as well set in the station just like it was before. Because we had nobody trained in when we asked for help, which I was willing to give it then. So my guess is, you know, we got a meeting again tonight. People need to come, they need to follow the bylaws, they need to be voted in as active members so they can get on that apparatus. If we're not going to follow the bylaws, then the rules don't mean anything. It's just whatever people want, and that's what happens. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, I'm Jean Lillard from Wakefield District. I want to address the temporary sign ordinance. As previously stated, we had one temporary sign per lot for 30 days. There are lots of exceptions, but the proposed ordinance says that 5 temporary signs are allowed per parcel. Now I'm thinking of my little lot in Flint Hill, what 5 signs would look like. Clutter. Plus, put an overall 100 days with an additional 100 days, 200 days. This is beyond reasonable. Too many temporary signs create clutter and detract from our scenery. Let's keep our ordinance the way it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ron Ackland, Jackson District. It comes very evident today from the conversation that's going on that we've got a serious fire and rescue problem here. And quite honestly, probably more serious fire and rescue. It's kind of the point when I'm here today that as far as the residents of the county go, we're pretty much on our own. I was at the Public Safety Committee meeting last night and made a request, or I asked a question and received an answer back. The question was, how do I get notified if there's a wildfire in Rappahannock County? And the answer I got was that that's in place for our landlines that are working, and you can sign up for yourself, and then it's on the county website. I spent 20 minutes this morning trying to find it on the county website. It's not there. I want to sign up, and it's not there, and I think there's a lot of people, after what we've seen down in Hawaii, to realize it can happen here. And we need to be notified, if nothing else. I mean, and probably nothing else is going to be able to happen. So what I'm asking is, we need to put something on the website now. We don't want to wait 6 months and study it or something. Put something on there, and I've got an example here. This comes from Maui. Of what they have on their website, but it's in plain letters and stuff like that. I went on our website under residents, because I thought that's where it should be, and there's nothing there. The animal control code, the taxes, county park, and all this stuff, nothing's there. And then I tried in the emergency services, nothing there. It's not there. It needs to be there in plain sight, and hopefully the papers and stuff can put this information out also in that. How do we sign up? Because it's, it could come 5 minutes from now, because we've seen the corn out there lately. It's ready to go. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ron.
Chris Parrish, Stonewall, Fourth District. So Rappahannock County is unique in several respects. We're the only county in the whole state that does not have GIS. That is a big layer of protection against outside developers. We have dark skies pretty much in this part of the East Coast, near the whole East Coast. We have zoning that's more stringent than most anywhere that protects us. It keeps our land open, it keeps cars off the highway since there's no houses built there. And it's, I think we all agree it's a pretty nice place to live. So there's another degree of uniqueness that we can aspire to. And I know it's bold, but I think it's possible. I know of other counties that have done this, not in Virginia, but in other states. And they banned all temporary signs. And I'm telling you, those are very peaceful and scenic and calm places to live. I'm just throwing that out there. I know it's not real bad.
Thank you, Chris.
sure I get this right. Eric Athanasiou Piedmont. I'd first like to thank Ms. Bruce for delivering to you the community letter on the sign ordinance. When a few of us first sat down to write this letter, we assumed it would be a handful of us expressing our shared opinion on maintaining our uniquely beautiful view shed. Our goal was to maybe have 10 people sign it if we could get there. Much to our amazement, in almost no time, more than 80 residents of Rappahannock had volunteered to sign this letter. I'm deeply gratified by the shared commitment this shows among those of us who live here. While many of us occasionally differ on some issues, most of us stand shoulder to shoulder in this county to nurture and protect our scenic treasures. I'm grateful to my neighbors and fellow citizens of Rappahannock for their time, their interest, and their goodwill. I also deeply appreciate the willingness of the board and county staff to work with all of us to create a sign ordinance that serves our values and furthers our comprehensive plan. This is best accomplished by not expanding the number and type of signage beyond what is currently allowed. The board would do well to pause consideration of this matter to allow interested citizens to make specific recommendations on language changes throughout the draft. A citizens' roundtable discussion would also be beneficial. Most of the concerns raised in our letter are matters that are already addressed under our existing ordinance and have been working pretty well for 30+ years. For example, our current ordinance does allow bars and businesses that are not located on primary highways to have permanent off-premises directional signs, 2 of them, pointing people to their establishment. It also allows, by special exception, unlimited temporary signs as needed to direct the traveling public to their business. This could include, for example, seasonal signs for farm products. Billboards, however, with flashy advertisements that detract from our scenery have long been prohibited. Yet the proposed language would change this to allow temporary signs by right now, directional signs, instead of by special exception, and would now also allow, by special exception, up to 2 billboards on every parcel in the county. Why is this necessary? Likewise, artwork, flags, including the U.S. flag and state flags, and even hay bale signs are currently fully allowed under our ordinance. They're just subject to the reasonable time, location, and size restrictions that other signs are subject to. The Planning Commission was correct in its initial direction to our planning staff. That is, our sign regulations have worked reasonably well for decades, so let's not use the Supreme Court's Gilbert decision as a vehicle for expanding the number and type of signs in our county. And speaking of the Gilbert decision, let's also be clear. Concerns being expressed about expanding signage in the county are not a debate about content. The Supreme Court has now made clear that we can neither require nor forbid certain content on signs. The county can't tell people what to say or not to say on a sign, whether it's a hay bale sign or anything else. That ship has sailed. So we're not talking about what you put on the sign. Within certain basic limits, you can put whatever you want on your sign. What we are talking about is how big outdoor displays will be, how many, where they're located, and what kinds of lights and moving parts they'll have. It's about how much they will detract from the amazing scenic resources with which we are blessed and which are so important to our business models and to the special quality of life we all value. Please let's work together to get it right, and thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, Deacon, son of all Hartford. I couldn't agree more with what Mrs. Masishi mentioned, said about our scenic, as Phil Elwood used to say, our unparalleled jewel. On the other hand, I'm also a fledgling owner of a business that is dependent on some small signage. Previous business of 50 years, I didn't need signage. I was on a project for 4 or 5 months, 6 months. One Sunday, we're located up at the west end of Sperryville. One Sunday, in desperation, I counted cars coming down the mountain. I had 122 cars in 30 minutes, times 2, and you round it up a little bit, times 8. I've got 2,000 cars coming by that don't know I'm there, 50 feet away. So consider the backbone of the county. Obviously, number one, it's our unparalleled business, but it's small business that runs the county. And just keep that in mind, please. Secondly, just a question, Mr. Carney. I'd like to know what this apparatus is that's on the bridge down in Rock Mills. I've seen it also in a couple of other places. I think it on Rappahannock.
The flood monitoring?
Is that what it is? Yeah. Shoot, it's ominous looking. Are you sure that's all it is?
Yeah. It was a long time, they were a long time coming.
Oh, my.
Some of
I
them,
like the gauges on the bridge above. This is an old river. They make a phone call and find out the river is. They don't need this Sputnik down.
there's one in Sperry too, correct, right across from the Savage
And
Pond.
it's
How
really,
in the world do they monitor a water level?
Lasers, I think.
I hope it's not.
I saw it too, and I thought it was someone standing on the.
That one has to report by satellite as well.
Same thing at Laurel Mills.
Was it the Office of, Virginia Office of Emergency
Many different groups came together.
The first time it doesn't have to go by, it does look like somebody standing on the bridge.
Anybody else public comment? Yes, ma'am.
In conversations, Monica Worth, Piedmont District, in conversations with my supervisor, with others over the past few weeks, many times what has come up has been a mention of roundtable meetings to get citizen input into processes that people have diligently worked on for numbers of years and through many, many meetings. I remember the town of Washington having similar problems with decisions that were made in committees that were operating for a very long period of time. And when it became obvious to the public what was occurring, it became a matter of contention. And I'm here to advocate for a citizen involvement process that isn't as official as this. And I don't know what the rules are for that, what's required for the various commissions and committees, but also what's available to the public for that kind of comment, that kind of back and forth. And it seems that it would be valuable when something has come out of committee or come out of another process, and hopefully during that process as well, to have at least an option for that, for issues that create this kind of level of public interest. And I would hope that if that is available, they could be facilitated by someone who is expert at doing just that very thing. We have people in our midst, not necessarily in Rappahannock County, but around us, who are very, very good at everything from facilitation of normal meetings to emotional intelligence qualities and things to bring to the table that make the ability of people to be heard and understood much more viable in a roundtable sort of situation. So I'm just here to throw my hat into the ring for not voting. So I'm sorry, throw my voice into the conversation around that topic, so that as we go forward, especially if this is the beginning of a zoning ordinance revision process, that we seriously consider a nice infrastructure of more casual public comment.
Thank you. Right. Yes, ma'am.
Sharon Pierce, Piedmont District. First of all, I gotta say, thank you all for your time. I realize this is essentially a volunteer position, as it is with the Planning Commission. And I think we need to be occasionally reminded of all the time we put into that. I also would agree with Mr. Kohler that as proposed, this ordinance is not compatible with our comprehensive plan. It's way too expansive, and it is unnecessary to be as expansive as it is. Just break it down and collapse it down. I also think, as the previous speaker was saying, The process by which you arrive at this ordinance is flawed. When you have continued meetings, when you have work sessions, from your side of the table, I appreciate that feels more economical time-wise, but it doesn't feel inviting for the citizens. Back in the old days, which is now a long time ago, when the Planning Commission was working on the comprehensive plan, we would go around to every district and have a roundtable. And we would listen, we'd raise the topic, and just listen. I think that's not a bad idea. I also, on another subject, I noticed going to Luray, and there's lots of billboards over there. I noticed my attention goes to the billboards. And I do recall when they were talking about animated signs for the Amosville Fire Department. One of the points of conversation was that it would be distracting. I think it is distracting. And from a public safety standpoint, let's just stick with temporary signs and make them short-term, as they are in our present ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Alright, not seeing any other hands here, I need to go to Zoom. I have quite a few people there. If anyone wishes to speak, please raise your Zoom hand and be recognized. Go ahead, Starsky.
Hi, hello. This is Lila Kowarski, Hampton District. I have request for the supervisors to request to VDOT. The road 211, 522 is a pretty busy road. And the intersection of 211 and the Rock Mills Road has had some accidents. I think the most recent one was last month, or last year. I think we had a fatal accident. The whole area is supposed to be a 45-mile zone, but the sign that's pretty close to the old gun store and another one on the west of Blue Rock, I believe. They say it's 45 miles an hour for the next 1.2 miles or something like that. They are both yellow signs, and nobody seemed to follow these signs. And this is really a request to change those to standard white 45 miles an hour sign. And that way people probably have tendency to follow it more closely. So that is my request for the supervisor to request to be not. Thank you.
Thank you.
There was another accident there yesterday, I think.
Anyone else on Zoom wishing to speak? Not seeing any hands, I'll go ahead and close public comment. Brings us to the consent agenda.
I'll move that we adopt the consent agenda.
Thank you. There's a second.
I will second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion?
Could we run through the supplemental appropriations, please?
So we will pull that out.
I'll amend my motion.
I'm happy to just talk about it and then vote. I don't necessarily need an amended motion.
Is that the only request?
We should be, I just want to make sure we're okay with procedure. The motion was to adopt it, and we still have a general discussion.
Ultimately, you make the rules, and only by policy do you guide how you handle the consent agenda, so
I mean, I just,
Okay,
it's,
go ahead.
it's a lot of money this month, and so before I vote, I'd like to hear the rundown before I make my vote, and if I don't want to vote for it, I'll ask for it to be pulled out of the consent agenda at that time.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay.
Thanks for the question. So this month's supplemental appropriations are broken down into two different sections. One section that is a carryover of funds from fiscal '23 into fiscal '24. And these are the carryover items that were not previously approved by the board as part of the fiscal '24 appropriations resolution to be automatically carried forward. Those that were in the fiscal '24 appropriations resolution to be automatically carried forward were restricted funds for grants in the general fund and also capital projects funds. So the items that are requested for carryover from fiscal '23 into fiscal from fiscal '23 into fiscal '24 are these. Use of $20,200 that was received in fiscal '23 from an insurance claim for a total vehicle, as well as $7,800 of the about $60,000 that was saved within the county admin budget. Both of those be combined to replace the vehicle in fiscal '24. Carryover of $60,000 that was budgeted in fiscal '23 within the Fire Services Fund for the Fire Rescue Strategic Planning Initiative. Use of $34,840 worth of net savings within the fiscal '23 emergency services budget, and combined with $12,872 of the more than $20,000 saved within the public safety operations and maintenance budget to purchase a replacement quick response vehicle. And then finally, within the carryover, use of $16,207 of the approximate $131,000 savings in fiscal '23 from the E911 budget, and a total of $8,500 received from the sale of 3 surplus Sheriff's Office vehicles to supplement the remaining project balance to fully fund purchase of a replacement Sheriff's Office vehicle. Within typical general supplements that are requested occasionally, for fiscal '24, appropriation of an insurance claim received for a replacement of a public safety radio that was lost during an emergency response. That appropriation request is $2,356. Use of $30,000 from the general fund contingency for purchase and installation of pole-mounted speed signs. That's based on quotes received. And appropriation of $2,090 refund received by the Sheriff's Office for prior purchase of police supplies.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks for being so prepared.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you.
Poor guy.
Now
You deserve better after all your years of service.
we get to recognize Alex Sherk.
Did you figure out when I started?
Yes.
No, it's a lot to read. This is a resolution of appreciation for Rappahannock County Water and Sewer Authority member Alexander Sharp. Whereas Alexander Sharp VII served the citizens of Rappahannock County for over 23 years as a member of the Rappahannock County Water and Sewer Authority. And whereas during his tenure on the Rappahannock County Water and Sewer Authority, he served as chairman for 8 years. And whereas he sacrificed countless hours as a volunteer for the betterment of the Sperryville sewer system, and whereas his consistent support for the citizens of Sperryville and his deep knowledge of the Sperryville sewer system has earned him the admiration of the citizens of Rappahannock County. And whereas the members of the Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors will always consider Mr. Sharp a respected friend, now therefore be it resolved that the Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors extend its sincerest thanks to Alexander Sharp II for his service on the Rappahannock County Water and Sewer Authority and wishes him all of the best in future endeavors. Be it further resolved that this resolution be spread across the minutes of the Rappahannock County Board of Supervisors for all citizens to reflect upon the service and accomplishments of this dedicated public servant, adopted this 6th day of September 2023.
Wow. Thank you all, I appreciate it. Thanks for sticking around. So
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can we just take like a 5-minute recess?
Sure, 5-minute recess. All right, if we can get going again, that's great. Next on the agenda is appointments.
Yes, you have an appointment for you for the Water and Sewer Authority. It's a vacancy. This is for the remainder of the unexpired term, which expires July 31, 2025. You have an updated application from Mr. Seiler. That's right. Before you, and the applicant is here, and information is available. I'm sure you and some of the members of the Water and Sewer Authority are here might be able to answer your questions.
Ms. Smith, you want to start?
I'm happy to just cut to the chase and make a motion that we appoint Dwayne Seiler to replace myself, who had been serving as a temporary member to the Water and Sewer Authority.
I'll second that motion.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion?
Do I need to indicate any term of service, Mr. Curry, to expire July 31st, 2020?
Let's take the cue from Mr. Sharp. We'll call it forever.
So there's 7 of you pointing.
In perpetuity.
What Luke had asked if they don't just start over, like go to a certain number and then start.
I would just say, Mr. Seiler, thank you for being here today and sitting through the meeting while you were waiting for this moment. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
Thanks for sticking with us. Thank you. Yeah, it'll be a great addition. We appreciate it.
Yes. All right. Appointment of alternate to the Blue Ridge Committee.
Yes, in 2018, the board appointed myself, Teresa Wood, Supervisor Smith to the Blue Ridge Committee for Shenandoah Park, and Mr. Welch was appointed as an alternate. I'm here to ask you to replace Mr. Welch with Ms. Jewell as an alternate. This is particularly important. There's a meeting coming up, and it competes with another meeting, so Ms. Jewell would definitely go in my place in that case if you would.
So I'll go ahead and make a motion to appoint Bonnie Jewell as the alternate appointee for Rappahannock County Blue Ridge Committee for Shenandoah Park relations and waive all informalities.
And I'll go ahead and second that motion and just add that I think Ms. Jewell will be a great asset.
And you have a hollow meeting.
I was gonna say, really, I mean, you got true hollow. It's amazing. What, can I just ask, I mean, what is the function of this?
This really goes back several years when the relationship between the national park and the adjoining localities wasn't great. It includes locals and state representatives, and so now really it's a coordinating effort, and this next meeting, the park is reaching out and wanting localities to bring public safety representatives so that there can be greater facilitation between the National Park Service and the adjoining community. So it's a good story, and of course we know Superintendent Kenny living here is very open to cooperation.
That's great.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Social Services Board.
Yes, so you will have Ms. Kathy Dutiel's term will expire on November 6, 2023. I bring this to you because your policy requests that I inform you 2 months or 2 meetings in advance. Ms. Dutiel was serving a partial term because you added 2 new members to that body here recently. So she has submitted an application already requesting reappointment. If the board is of a mind to do that, you can do that at this meeting. It has not been advertised, and don't believe she is here. So you should waive informalities if you choose to appoint her.
Well, I don't know how the board feels, but I think when you have a good person who's willing to take something on,
Yep.
and you can save a little money not advertising, you should go ahead and do it. So
Okay.
I would just go ahead and make a motion that we reappoint Kathy Dutiel for the new term
And because
that
she's
begins in November.
a Wisconsin native, I'll second.
And that does run through November 6, 27.
We have a motion and a second. Any further
I
discussion?
would just add that I waive all formalities.
Hopefully she's not a Green Bay Packers fan.
Come on, guaranteed.
So she is
There's no
eligible to
question.
serve 2 full terms, and so you will have, if you play your cards right, you will have gotten a partial term and 2 full terms from her.
Great.
Sounds like good planning on our part.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you. All right. Going into old business. Looks like we've got our CWSA, ARPA.
Yes. The Water and Sewer Authority came to the board some months ago and requested consideration to receive some ARPA funds for a number of different projects. They shared with you a plan at that time. The board ultimately allocated $65,000 to them. They've been investing those dollars for many months and have been reimbursed for some of that after presenting receipts for expenditures to my office. They're here now to let you know some of the things that they found and make further requests. So.
Hi. Thank you all for allowing us to come before you. With me today, we have Pamela Parker, who is our plant manager, and we have Will Lloyd, who is our almost newest now. Dwayne is the newest board member. He was voted into the treasurer position, but he has a fabulous background in engineering. So I'm going to make this as quick as I can because I know it's getting late. So my suggestion, I guess I should say, I've been on the board since 2018. I've been the chair since 2021. We vote officers every year. And I am really impressed with some of the work we've been able to do. So thank you for funding that ARPA money to us. And it's certainly in this report. And I don't want to read the report to you. So I'm going to say, if there are, I can make it really easy and you could just vote us the money. And then we'd be all done. However, this report goes into great detail to what we've been able to do. And it talks about our previous funding, which turned into a very good exercise, especially we found some dangerous items that now we've had the money to get fixed, especially with the EQ tank. And we had asked for $65,000. It's really pretty much all spent at this point, although it's not been billed and all sent to Gary Curry. The way it works is we have to pay for it. We get the bills, then we have to turn it in to Gary Curry's office, and then they approve it, and then we get paid back.
Make sure everybody's clear. It goes to Bonnie.
Oh, Bonnie, okay, Bonnie, okay. Gary, I said the office, okay. So that's been incredibly helpful. But as we've gone through looking at things, we have determined there's so much more we need to do. The plant is now over 40 years old. That's an old plant. And there are many new things that are coming up. One of the biggest ones is the EQ tank report, which you hopefully have. I know you guys have so much to read, so I can't imagine that you read everything in preparation, although if you did, that's great. And there was an EQ tank report that was done as one of our ARPA projects, and it says in it that the assessment says and recommends immediate replacement due to safety concerns and the potential for another collapse.
And that's what was retrofitted after that big stormwater event, right? The one that
Yes,
Rick
yes.
Naraki tied it together with.
Yes. And Rick is still helping on the EQ tank currently, because once he got started on it, it was almost like, oh, there's another problem. Oh, so we definitely have, Rick is on it and he's working it. But so the EQ tank, right now, Will has worked up a project scope for the replacement of this tank. Early estimates are between $280,000 and $380,000, which would be design services, equipment, and installation. We're actually not asking for that tonight. We will probably be working with Bonnie Jewell on the ways that we can get funding. She's got a background in helping utilities, and we are a utility, and we will need help. But we also have to keep in mind that we have, and I did include the balance sheet from August 31st, and if you looked at it, you might say, oh, well, you guys have money, you're okay, but we have to keep a reserve. We have to be willing, when we do get funding, they're not going to fund the whole thing. We will always have to put in money. So we need to be constantly keeping our reserves going. And we have many projects coming up. If you can turn, I don't know, turn to the description of the following current projects we're looking for funding, and they're numbered. And those are what I'm here for today primarily. One, I wanted to give the report showing we are using the money responsibly. And two, I wanted to see where that's leading us. And three, I wanted to say thank you for the funding we did receive. That's been a huge help. So when we look at this new report, nothing is huge except for the purchase of this number 9, the study design for an EQ tank. And that's because we do need to get experts in to look at it. There's new technology all the time. We need to really research what is the best way to keep the plant going for many years, another 40. So that is a big one. That's $30,000. And then we do have the study for the septic and pump tank updates for 15. And the biggest one, number 12, is a maintenance truck with a debit. And Will can tell you about that, but that's going to be so helpful in pulling the pumps, because we do have aging pumps. Pretty much everything is aging. So we just have to accept that. We're looking for $138,868 in funding. We understood, and we were sad to hear that the ARPA money was gone, or not gone, incorporated into the county's funding. So you could call this what you want, but it's still the type of projects that ARPA would have funded. So now I'd like to say thank you again and take a moment to answer questions that have, if this is too brief, then I'm just trying to be watching your time here, because I know you're.
I do have a question. Thank you for that presentation. I do have a question. Do you guys not have a backup power system currently for the UV? You do, but this wouldn't, the standby power system would replace it? Yeah. What's that?
Project. We always had one, but it was a welder generator. It was
Trailer mounted, not automatic.
yeah, yes. So
So we'll tell them what got put in.
So, but we have one.
just simply some wiring and the ability to connect to smart portable. It's the minimum thing that we need just to run the UV banks.
I got you.
Because that's, I know you always are impressed, Pamela, with my technical expertise. I'm talking way beyond my skill level here, but is that because that's the water that's going into the river?
Yes.
Okay, I got that right. So that's important.
Yes.
Because when you lose power.
Ultraviolet light's really important.
Kills bad
before-
stuff.
It's before you go into the river. It's very important.
It's the last step, so that's critical.
Yes,
Just to remain in DEQ compliance, et cetera.
it's required.
Okay.
The other thing I can call out to you, of course, we did provide a copy of the budget, and it shows a $205,000 deficit. And I can say that we are carefully looking at everything and trying to make sure our budgets are appropriate and reflect that we really have some issues coming up. It's not to frighten anybody, but it's to be smart and look ahead.
So I don't know if Mr. Curry or Ms. Jewell could comment on this, and I don't mean to scare you with my questions, but
No, go ahead. I thought my experts.
in terms of this being an authority, can an authority borrow from a county? Could we structure any kind
I
of
think
lending
you
arrangement?
probably could provide a loan. You can also provide direct funding.
Right.
It would be
The county
precedent for a loan from this first started.
Yeah, I don't know, I was gonna say, I don't know how legal it was, but they actually did that. There was a 1% interest tacked on it to kind of give them an incentive to pay it back. But I have a question about the budget when we get to the.
And my only other question was, just clarify for me, and I know I've asked a question before, as an authority, do they have the ability to go
Yes.
borrow money?
Yes.
Okay.
So let me add a couple things. Sure. The budget paperwork that you have is probably the first budget that pulls together some actual costs that we're starting to experience. The plant, the collection system, everything is very old, credit replacements are starting to come on. So this budget shows a deficit of about $200,000. It's unlikely to get better.
Right.
Moving forward, we have 200 septic tanks we have to maintain and replace pumps,
Yeah.
replace controls, it's just endless. The plant work that we're talking about with the EQ tank will no doubt require us to borrow money to pay for that. There's options for us, WQIF, DEQ, other people where we can get low interest and favorable term loans for the construction of that facility. A lot of the other work is maintenance and replacements and repairs that we're starting to experience and plan for, rather than waiting until the stuff fails.
And then I know that, in speaking with Sherry previously about this, you obviously can't put this full burden on the shoulders of your ratepayers either. And I know from experience, having been on that board, that, I mean, your rates have to remain within the parameters of what's normal for a locality. So it's not as if you could go justify recovering that kind of money through a rate increase.
There needs to be a conversation, which Gary and I have talked about, and I think it's a future conversation with Ms. Jewell on what our rates are set at, and are they where they need to be, not based on necessarily our expenses, but relative to other jurisdictions. In other words, are our rates fair right now? Are they too high? Are they too low? Despite all that, it's unlikely to be enough to pay for all this.
And then the last thing I just is a comment, because we've talked about this, and I just want to state it on the record again. To me, this is nothing on you. This is just the way it is. But to me, in a county of 7,373 people, or whatever our current population is, we have 2 standalone wastewater treatment systems. There's zero relationship between the authority and the town of Washington. The town of Washington, as far as I can tell, has decided that they're going to pay a premium to an outside consultant. Great consultant, they do great work. But to me, for all citizens affected directly or indirectly by the financial performance of those 2 systems, it begs the question, why are those systems not functioning together in a coordinated way to benefit from economies of scale and
Well,
We
and
are totally happy to talk with them.
and
We're
I'm-
totally open.
I just, because it seems like there's huge, maybe not huge opportunity, but there's some opportunity
even if
to
it's
gain
not-
economies of scale and redundancy.
Even if there's not opportunities there may very well be. You also have two school systems.
Correct.
Two plans
That we
and
take
two
care
school
of.
systems that we take care of. You know, my thoughts are, the plan of Sperryville, I hate to say it, but it hasn't got much attention, hence the need for all these replacement repairs and upgrades. Now, I don't know what the status of these other plans are, like in the town or at the schools. Are they getting the attention they need as far as planning for repairs and maintenance and upkeep? Or are they gonna end up in the same boat in 20 or 30 years as well? If you had all these together under one entity, you then might be able to afford a manager who could actually oversee all this, be planning for this, having people look at this. Otherwise, you're gonna end up in the same boat there as you are here.
Yeah, no, and I mean, you more than anticipated sort of my follow-up question in that regard. It just doesn't make sense to me. It really doesn't. And I've raised it previously with the town of Washington government, and it was raised previously when I was on the board of the sewer authority, and it seemed like there's really no interest from that
Interest on
side.
the part of,
Yeah, from their side. So
we have always said we
yeah,
are
I think
receptive.
to me, it's just, as we're talking about just ongoing day-to-day management, maintenance, and planning related expenses, to do this in a collective, coordinated way. It seems like
Just from a staffing point of view, I mean, I hate to say it, until I came aboard, there was nobody to look at this and understand what's going on, what needed to be done, right? And your typical authority is not gonna have that expertise. So at some point, that expertise goes away and you're back to the starter from.
Yeah.
Whereas, and I don't know, maybe the same situation exists at the town and maybe at the schools, but if you had them under one roof, you might be able to hire a manager who understood all that, and be able to manage that and plan and look after these facilities.
I had another question about the 18, it seems 18 panels and 18 pumps. Were they at the same account that were replaced this year?
We haven't even started replacing them. The goal is to replace all 200 of them over the next 10 years.
I guess I was just looking at the line items where it says 18 panels this year, number
They
one.
will be the same, right? So the idea is we're going to go into a location, replace the panel, replace the pump, replace the floats.
And those are probably, it's presumably the original panel?
I suspect.
In most, wouldn't you say almost all?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That
So
was
that's over 40 years old.
Yeah, that was my question.
This is at the plant.
They're not at the plant. Well, they're out, well, Christine and her mom were on one. I mean, everybody's got them, that is part of the sewer plant.
Each residence includes a septic tank and a pump tank.
Right,
The pump tank.
but each resident that has an individual home has a drain field, and a lot of those.
No.
No, you're interrupting me. I wire them up. When you have individual drain fields out there in people's houses, there are pump systems. They have septic tanks, they have pumps, and they have to control that and pay for all the maintenance there.
You mean a typical residential setting as opposed to in Sperryville?
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Not the way it works here.
Yeah, in
So
Sperryville, it's
Well,
not
no,
that way.
I think the plant.
I don't think you're not getting what I'm trying to say because you keep interrupting me, sir. You just wait a minute.
Okay, good.
Why would the citizens everywhere else in the county pay for somebody else's individual pump system in Sperryville?
Well, I don't know, but I can tell you what's in Sperryville if you want to hear that. I can't tell you why or how, but I
Well,
can tell you what's here now.
that's my question. You're coming here asking for money, and we've had a short discussion, not very long, but a short discussion about rates and whether they're correct or not, or, you know. It doesn't matter what we charge another locality, it's what it costs you to operate that system. And I have to question the $200,000 deficit in your budget that you adopted. What's the normal budget size?
Well, there is no normal budget. This is the first budget really reflected what the actual costs are.
No, what was the normal budget that y'all adopted years and years? You said you've been on there 5 years now.
Honestly, when I came, There wasn't much in place, I'm sorry to say.
You didn't have an operating
This
budget?
authority appears to have cash funded things for many years, and as cash came in, it went out, and they.
Yes, Ron, that is true, we did not have
That's
a
the budget.
budgeting process.
It's basically whatever their revenue was, is what they were spending to keep the plant going.
And so
Yeah.
the discussions that have happened over the last couple of years have jumped them into annual budgeting.
Yes.
To understand their near-term operational needs and their long-term capital replacement needs, and that's why they're starting to understand that they do have some issues. And at a very high level that Bonnie and I have already talked about with some others is that no, the ratepayer of today shouldn't pay a balloon payment of $200,000 for a something, but that $200,000 widget is going to last for 30 years, and so the next 30 years a ratepayer should pay for that. And that's where you need to structure all that
Getting back to what I
together.
was trying to say though, if my neighbor has a septic tank and a pump system, it's all on them because the people in Sperryville aren't helping pay for it.
And so in this case, the septic tanks and pumps are owned by the authority.
It's part of the system.
They're
Ron,
not owned by the individuals.
Ron, there is also the point that from an EPA and DEQ, we have to keep Thornton River clean. I mean, it's not an option. And that's what was happening in the past.
I don't know why you would say that because I never suggested anything otherwise.
Well, because that's how come we have a system. It used to be the independent, as you
Right,
said.
but if each one of those houses had a septic system, I mean, it's a pump and a septic tank to collect the solids, and then, I'm not gonna try and explain the process, but if it's, why aren't they gonna pay for that?
Because it's part of their collection system, so when the system was put
Well, I
in.
understand it, but why aren't the users paying for the system that they're using?
Well, they
Just
are,
like my neighbor.
they are through their fees.
I think, if
Well, then
I
I think that's what they need to figure out in their budget system before you come up here asking for $200,000.
Well, I think it's an interesting question, Mr. Fraser, because I think that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's we're asking the whole county to pay for these guys over here.
No, you're asking people that already pay for their own
Yeah, no, no.
systems to help pay for somebody else's system.
No, totally. Yes, that's what I'm saying. However, in your district, those people who need help can go to Culpeper Soil and Water and get grants.
No, I've seen that happen before, and they don't give them any money.
No, they do. I know they tons of people. Anyway, my point is that program's there to help people replace their drain fields. And I think in this sense, what Ms. Woodard is saying is that the county is responsible for making sure that the river doesn't get poisoned. We are. So we have to figure out, it's a policy decision that we have to make, how to pay for it.
No, nobody wants to pollute the water to start with, so I don't even know why that's being factored into a conversation based on something I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say is, they have a system that they need to figure out how to take care of, and if it costs people money to use that system, then they have to pay it.
I think
Well,
just
that's
Because my neighbor's paying to maintain theirs, those people have to maintain theirs.
That's why I raised the idea of rates and why Mr. Lloyd talked about maybe there needs to be a truing up process that occurs with respect to the rates. I remember we set the rates at an even number that I could remember, but now it's not even, so I can't. Whatever it is per month, if you multiply that by the number of EDUs, it basically is, you're asking the question about the budget, that was their budget. Basically $180,000 in, and they would spend it, and they were preserving their cash in the bank, which is cash left over, I think, from the original grant. So they've been very prudent and disciplined in keeping that plant going with the revenue they've been earning through the rates that the system payers are paying.
But 30-year negligence doesn't make up for ratepayers can't make up for that.
The long-term planning's been lacking. So can I ask, how time-sensitive are the projects that you identified 1 through 12? And could they stand at least a cursory study on rate impact of absorbing, how the ratepayers could pay for this, this and other planned work, EQ tanks, all the things that you think you might need over the next 30 years? What would that debt service require of the ratepayers? Is it viable when you build in other inflation?
Those are the numbers that need to come back before we make.
So this is what I'm suggesting. If the timing can of these projects, you can set that aside enough time to do at least cursory review a sensitivity analysis to see, well, it's going to be a gazillion dollars per EDU, then the answer is math doesn't work. And the math doesn't work because maybe we should have been doing this for the last 20 years. But we're here now, and so now we have to look forward. How are we going to do that? And the board has to decide, and the community has to decide, is it important that Sperryville is viable, and it can only be viable with a sewer plant, and the money doesn't work from ratepayers, so then you need to talk about how that works out. But without understanding the rate implications, I think it's difficult.
That's one part of it for sure.
And the part I'm concerned about is we've got 12 on the screen, are there 12 more that we don't know about coming?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And
Those are the first 12.
Right.
Yeah,
So how
and
many?
some of those are annual, like 1 and 2 are
Yeah.
ongoing for the next 10 years. A lot of the other ones, some of them we've actually completed already, and the RFP that we've been kicking around is going out to take care of the EQ tank replacement. And actually, that project is probably going to result in more than just an EQ tank replacement. It's probably going to start to pick up a lot of the other things in the plan that's been neglected after.
And they're looking at new state regulations coming down the line. At some point, nobody knows what they're going to say, but they have to try to manage the design in a way that allows them to improve their
The plan is to accommodate that with this new EQ tank, so that when those new regulations come out, that we should have the ability to meet them with what we're building today.
As far as timing, we are using up money from our reserves. We're starting to just do these things anyway, have to be done. So
Yeah. I mean, I think.
this is not a conversation, this is not the end of the conversation.
I mean, if we have, if you're able to help us, we don't have that expertise in-house. I mean, we can do the simple math. But if you can help us look at maybe what the rates would be, what these loans would cost us, and, you know, what our rates are relative to, you know, what's an acceptable rate to a citizen in Sperryville, and maybe look at that compared to what we pay now and what others pay.
Well, and the question isn't always whether, what rate is acceptable. The question is, what rate do you get after you do all this other math? And then it might be obvious that it isn't, or you can say, wow, that's only $1 more than what we're charging.
One thing I would point out, which was a shocking figure to us, I worked with Debbie Nick, our treasurer, to find out the latest census, 2020, and Sperryville came in at a per capita of 83,000.
I don't understand that.
And Little Washington came in at 38,000.
Per capita income.
Yeah.
Who answers that?
And that ruined our.
And
ability
that is
to
what
get grants.
really hurt.
And it doesn't allow them to get certain loans.
Right, we can't.
We get
USDA.
grants.
Yeah.
Grants that pay for it.
So I wanted to bring that to your attention also. It seems really wrong, but that's what happens when you do a census, and not everybody, you know, enters their
Well,
information.
and the census is the zip code, it's not the rate payers.
I think it's the census designated
Right,
place,
right.
which is a loosely defined thing around Sperryville.
But it's not the 200 users.
It's
on the
not.
system. So part of the planning may be more accurate numbers for the people that are actual system users to see if there's grants that can be pursued. And I think probably the best asset we can hope to come out of this meeting with is if Ms. Jewell can join us for our meetings and interface with some of those ideas, because I know that there is grant money out there. There was a special assessment on certain classifications of businesses last year. I don't know if that's exactly the right word you all used when you took, or those folks paid extra money just to stay on the system last year. But we've got to keep it off the backs of our businesses and our homeowners, because we all know most at that income level. When I look around my peers in Sperryville, I don't see it.
I didn't see that 83,000.
We can't afford a high rate.
Right.
So it is, I think, it will be a concerted effort to come up with accurate numbers on income, to figure out grants that are available that are a good fit, to be able to make those materialize, to offset the costs that we know are coming in the future. And it is a complicated process.
And one of the things that Christine knows is that Sperryville has become a real center of tourism, and it brings in a lot of tourist dollars. And the meals and lodging, it brings in all of those things. And I did approach Gary and Bonnie, excuse me for using personal names, about seeing if we could get a piece of that returned back to the sewer plant, since the reason we have the sewer allows for the tourism. We go hand in hand. And
Is there a
that
means to
time
track
is-
that revenue?
I'm sorry, what?
Is there a means to track that revenue?
Well, of course, we know who pays.
Yeah.
My general response was, those tours come with added expenses for law enforcement and all sorts of other things. So it's hard when you start trying to slice those pies up that way. There's no end once you do that.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there was a way to do that though, if it's.
You know, Laurel Mills would fund all of Castleton,
Yeah.
and I mean, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I did again look at it with Debbie Nick to see if it was possible. Yes, it is possible, but whether it has the blessing of the board to do it.
I hear what you're saying, Gary. There is a movement afoot by some people in Sperryville to pursue a town in the future. And to me, that would be catastrophic, because if you're losing that revenue from a town, and I don't mean to call out your face, Mr. Curry, but I mean, if you're losing revenue as a county, we only have so many sources of revenue in the county, and a lot of it is tourism dollars. And we have a lot of restaurants and Airbnbs in Sperryville, and if we didn't have
And
a good
breweries.
system, we would really be in trouble.
I don't think they have the population to go for cancer.
Well, not yet, but people have ideas. It's just a matter of time.
Well,
And I know there's a threshold and it is hard to meet, but people are working on it.
So what do we need to do to move forward on?
yeah, I don't want to
Well,
keep any more
I
time.
mean, all I want to say is, I really appreciate all the preparation work that went into this. I at least want to emphasize that we're in this together, and it's a matter of figuring out how to get a lot of this done. And I mean, it sounds like Bonnie's prepared to help you all and look at current rates, what the rate could possibly go to, and let's just figure it out together. We recognize there's some urgency because we don't have a ton of cash reserves to draw from, but I think if we all just think through this, and I have to say, I'm glad you're talking with us, because at least when I was on the board, and we did do, David Aldrich in particular did really thorough financial projections of what would be required over time to replace the plant. And for whatever reason, I think we always felt like we were alone.
We've never went anywhere, that
Right.
time frame. So-
Yeah, it was just, we saw the numbers
Yeah.
and thought, well, okay, so we just kept limping along. And you run a great plant, don't get me wrong, but I mean, you use all that revenue to keep the plant going, and that's to be applauded. But I'm glad you're here, because now I think we can all focus on the fact that we can't just keep doing that any longer, which is a key
I
point.
think that's really true.
Yeah.
And I appreciate all your time and energy tonight. And if there's no more questions, we can move on with plans. Gary?
No, I would just, if there is don't mistake my thoughts on whether meals and lodging tax should be parsed up with the authority of the board. Obviously, you drive that, and if there's a line of the board that you want staff to look into how that pie might be divvied up, we'll find a way to do that. I think some of the data is protected, but it probably could be homogenized in a way, aggregated, so that no one business has their data released. We can make that data available to the board, so you can try to make informed decisions about that. If there's other pieces of information that we can help bring to the board to help you wrestle with some of those decisions, we're happy to.
I would say the things we need, I think the rate analysis that you mentioned would be really helpful. Number two, just answering the question whether we could loan money to an authority within the county. Number three, I guess you already answered, the authority can pursue its own outside funding, and then four, I guess it would be useful to at least see the meals and lodging tax data disaggregated by locality or area.
Yeah, I have already looked at it, and there is money, that
Yeah.
even a piece of it would help. And I want to add just one last thing, which is there are two authorities. There's us and the park. I'm sorry, the rec center. And when, several years ago, we were always funded for our audits and for our insurance. And a couple of years ago, that was taken away. And the park, the rec center, has had them added back in. They are smaller, they're not as big, etc. But RCWSA is still having to fund insurance costs over $10,000. And the audit at a minimum is $6,000. So even getting some help on that would be very beneficial.
I think that's important and we should be consistent, so maybe.
There is no separate audit for the rec authority, it's part of the county's audit. And so the county was paying for authority costs that were responsibility of the ratepayers. So the authority needs to pay for the costs that are the responsibility of the authority, as does the library.
Okay.
And so that allows you to budget and account for your funds appropriately. Now, once you know how much those costs are, if the board and the community at large wants to subsidize that, sure, eyes wide open.
Okay, great. All right, so that's the fifth thing we should at least keep on the radar, because it would help.
It would, everything. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Are you having fun with it? Someday you two will get a certificate of appreciation.
Won't be for
Now
25 years, 25 months.
Now that Wayne has heard all this, he's going to rescind.
I know, I was
I
like,
said, I don't know about this.
no, it's
This
all
was
good. You're one
a
of the bunch
good
of
on
great people.
board, wasn't it?
Yeah.
All right, we're moving into the sign ordinance.
As the board is aware, held a public hearing on the proposed sign ordinance amendment. I purposely did not identify this item as action. I know there's a lot of confirmation with the public. At your last meeting, there was some discussion that staff would review the typographical issues that were identified and defined. I believe the issue was identified on line 218 where a G is misplaced. And that was due to one of the Berkeley group comments of moving one section up and just didn't follow through with the relettering. And the board was going to, I guess, do some homework and think about some of the broader issues that then you can task staff with taking action or drive forward a process to help move from where you are now to an eventual adopted revised ordinance. I would say that it is not an option to keep your existing ordinance the way it is. It's not enforceable in many ways. And while what was advertised for your recent public hearing might not be what you want, I do believe it must change.
Thanks, Gary. I mean, I know when we left the last meeting, we had a robust public comment, and that was great, and we certainly heard a lot of good information. To me, they centered around, I think we received feedback on again today, which was temporary signs, off-premises signs, hay bale signs, lighting, and flags. And to me, lighting and flags, I think, are messaging issues. And I thought we had covered them in our last meeting. And if we can maybe review flags and lighting again today, I think, and hope that we can set those aside. And I believe the other topics are ongoing matters of discussion for the board and up for changes if folks so see fit. And I would suggest that the board do a couple of things that, it's sort of like being back in 2020 when we're trying to get the comprehensive plan over the goal line. And that maybe we should draft responses to the citizen group and RLEP addressing their concerns, and in particular talking about the flag and lighting provisions that are already in the ordinance. And beginning a conversation about the other items.
Certainly the citizen letters as prompts to help ask yourselves the questions that some people are suggesting are important, that might guide you into a pathway.
Yeah. There's a lot here to chew on. I don't know.
For the topic of more
What specific
round
is about the chew on?
Well, as Ms. Smith kind of laid out, and at the last meeting, though I was not here, I had mentioned that I can start with the flag one, which is that I don't understand why we wouldn't have a height restriction of 35 feet.
Well, we don't right now because flagpoles were exempted in the zoning ordinance from height, so that's something you could do.
Which I think that's all we should do. I think we just do that. That's fine. There's a building restriction of 35 feet, correct? Match
Well,
that.
50 commercial.
Match that at 35 feet, settle. But in my mind, for my concerns. The other ones are the temporary signs, the big signs, which are the hay bale signs. And so kind of getting into that stuff, I think it just... And then there's a structural issue which I think we should solve, which is that I've read this thing like 20 times, and I think that people should be able to read it and know what they need a permit for and what they're allowed to do without having to call the county. That's just my opinion. Whether that's guidance that's embedded in the ordinance, but I think if we're going to try and get this thing, folks to follow it, it needs to be understandable. And I feel like to most people, it's not. I think that staff did a fantastic job with constraining what they had to do, but I think the layout needs some more work. Moving on from that, the temporary signs thing, I really think it should be 90 days. And I think that these large hay bale signs give free speech to some people and not to others. Because there's restrictions on who get to have them. And so not everybody gets to have them.
There's no restrictions on who gets to do it.
They're setbacks. So I couldn't have one in my house. I don't have the setbacks. So I think that we should be fair. And I think that we should say, hey, if you can have these signs, everybody has to be able to have them. I'm not okay with that saying like, okay, well you've got more property, you get to have a bigger sign. I just think it's a free speech thing. I think if we're gonna give people free speech, we need to give it across the board. So I think that needs working out.
If a person has a larger piece of property, they can run a different type of business from their residence, basically. They can run a farm, where you can't maybe run some other type of business from your...
So these hay bale signs only apply to non-commercial speech.
Right.
So we're talking purely about First Amendment.
I'm saying it's
we're talking about
a piece of property allows somebody to run a business. So that's a farm. A farm is a business, whether it makes money or not.
Right.
But if you live in a small lot in town, you can't run most businesses from there.
But businesses don't have a First or Second or Third Amendment. My point is that everybody has the same access to that First Amendment right of free speech. And my point is,
if you're trying to get to equality and diversification and all that stuff in the sign ordinance, then we're already lost.
No, I'll just say it again. I
know what you're saying, but if the size of the property is what gives this person the right to say something, and this person they can't say it because they can't get the setback, then you're trying to...
Well, we're limiting one person's free speech.
No, we're not limiting anybody. What you're trying to do is trying to make everybody equal, and you can't do that.
No. The First Amendment gives everybody the same amount of free speech.
Right.
Everybody.
Right.
And if we say, you over here get to have a huge sign, but you over here don't, what we're saying is we're getting in between that.
No. Just because this individual has the ability to make the setback, maybe they don't really care whether they have a sign there or not, and 6 of your neighbors want to get together and put a sign there, they all have the same ability to do that.
You do understand that we're making the rule. We are making a rule.
I understand it, but I don't think you're following me.
I am. And
No, I don't think you did, because
I think I
you
do.
wouldn't have came back with that response. If,
I think I do. And I think what I'm saying is that I in Woodville don't have the setback requirements.
Right.
So we're making a rule
you don't, but the
that
guy
says,
across the road does, and 6 of y'all can get together and put a hay bale sign over there.
but I can't do it on my property.
You can't do it on your property. There's a lot of things you can't do on your property.
Freedom of speech is different.
Freedom of speech is not limited to the property.
Here it is.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
No, it's not.
Okay, well, I can't have 25 hay bales on my lot in Woodville, so it is. I think you're
Put
wrong.
it across the road on the neighbor thoroughfare.
Not my property.
So I think it's pretty clear that Mr. Carney is not in favor of 25 hay bills.
No, I'm not in favor of
You're
giving
moving
some
towards some
people
understanding of what.
more free speech than others. I'm not in favor of that. I don't think that I want everybody to have the same amount. I think it is the fairest thing to do. I have people in my district that don't have pieces of property where they can do this.
One thing you may want to think about from the standpoint theoretically, because this is a really cool argument, I love it, is there's always going to be certain parcels in the county that will have advantages of position for purposes of advertising. And they're smaller or bigger or wherever they're located. Think about the FJB sign that was so offensive to everybody across from the school bus stop in Sperryville. So there you got a postage stamp lot with a huge audience. So I would challenge the assumption that it's elitist, I suppose, to say that from our ordinance perspective, because there is always going to be advantages of position, whether it is vista-wise, from the standpoint of Mike Maskin's field, or it's a tiny postage stamp lot in Flint Hill or Sperry. So I don't know. Theoretically, the underpinnings of this argument perhaps should be revisited. Not that they shouldn't be discussed, but should a zoning ordinance, a sign ordinance, be in the position of equalizing all positions of advantage for speech?
I don't think that that's what I'm asking here. I think what I'm saying is that by creating a rule that allows some but not others, I think that that's a different the advantage of VISTA. What we're essentially saying is you have to have X in order to have the same amount of free speech. Your point is well taken. Somebody up on Bessie Bell that just putting a huge sign in the middle of trees, nobody can see it. But I think the point behind the freedom of speech is not, and we're talking about non-commercial speech here. We are not talking about commercial speech. You cannot put on these hay bale signs, hay for sale. So I think the point is the freedom of speech, not commercial activity, not advertising.
It's non-commercial speech.
Well, it's an advantage of position that I guess is endemic to differently placed. My point is that should we then restrict the person who has the advantage of position for advertising a thought on a smaller parcel, should we also, on the other side of the equation, restrict that individual's freedom in order to equalize the impact of a sign ordinance?
Well, currently there is no rule.
I know, but we're talking about making a rule.
We're talking about the imposition.
So does it not follow that if Mike has this advantage of position in terms of the size and construction of the sign, that, Joe Schmuckatoonie on the corner of a busy intersection, should he now not also be, should his speech be restricted because of his advantage of position?
No, I think that everybody should have the same amount.
Which would mean that nobody has any amount if we're trying to equalize.
No, that we could give them both the equal amount, the same amount. So Mike gets the same amount as his neighbor.
But you haven't then reduced the reduction in advantage of position.
Currently, we have no rule.
So
we don't have a rule right now, right? So now,
well, there is, but it's
right. But I'm saying for this kind of thing, in our old ordinance, we have nothing like this.
No,
the differences are limited to zoning district distinctions.
But like this, that's a non-commercial speech that you can put anything you want on there, like the Beatles are the best band in the world. We don't have anything like this with 25 hay bales.
That's not
And-
true anyway, it's the Allman.
Allman Brothers are the best band in the world. And so you can have 800 square feet if we're talking about big Iowa hay bales. That's 800 square feet. And now we can put that anywhere except for a few people in my district that don't have lots that will allow it. And I'm just saying that as a policy position, I think that because I view freedom of speech as inherently one of the most valuable protected individual rights we have, why would we make a policy position that says you get a bigger one than this person? And all I'm saying is that I think we should think it through and give people the same amount.
So what would
That's
you
all I'm saying.
propose?
We just haven't talked about it. I was saying that with the temporary signs, I wanted to take it down to 90. With the hay bale signs, here was my issue. Then Mr. Ferris and I started talking about it. I don't know. I'm not here to propose something necessarily today. I was just saying I would like to look at it from a policy perspective and say instead of like, oh, well, you have to have this and this and this and this. If we're going to do something, let's look at what we're saying to the public, which is what we're saying to the public is, hey, you get to have a bigger voice than that person. And I don't think I'm comfortable with that.
I think,
Well,
I mean,
I don't know.
So anyway, that's
No,
why I
I
just
was-
wanted to bring that up.
I was just gonna say, I think one way to address a lot of the hay bale sign debate is placing, and I think you alluded to it, is just coming up with a reasonable time period for temporary signs, because a lot of what I've seen in for example, the hay bale discussion is like, these hay bale signs could be up for it was maybe in the RLEP document, could be up for 200 days. I can speak with some authority that people who have had hay bale signs in the past, just out there, people I know, they view them as temporary signs and would have no problem with the time limit placed on such temporary signs. I mean, I don't know if, I understand there's concern also about, just talking about hay bales in particular, there's concern about the size of them and setback. There were hay bale signs in the town of Washington on somebody's front stoop. I mean, two big round bales in a front yard. So, I mean, maybe it's as simple as time limit, maybe some reasonable size limit. And if the time limit's tight enough, I think a lot of people can live with that, because we're not talking about 6 or 7 months, we're talking about whether it's 90 days. I feel that way about political signs. I mean, I took my signs down within, I think, 24 hours of the end of the election. Nobody wants to look at them, but it's a necessary evil of running for public office. And I think political signs, hay bale signs, other little temporary signs that organizations have to put up, they just have to be time limited. And then going back to Mr. Carney's point about readability of the ordinance, if there's just a simple thing in there that says, here's the time limit for a temporary sign, and temporary signs include all the following, it's pretty elegant and straightforward, I think.
And the draft contained numbers that Mr. Curry and I put in there with the understanding that they were simply placeholders.
Yeah.
That this would be a subject for the board to decide. And yes, legally, as long as you're just regulating the time limit of display, as long as it's reasonable, if you're gonna allow it at all, then yeah, you can regulate that down to whatever number of days you deem to be reasonable for a temporary sign.
And do political signs by definition under the Gilbert have to just be called temporary signs, right?
Temporary signs, doesn't matter what they contain.
Right.
Whether it says, you know, Joe for supervisor, or whether it says church meeting at 7 on Saturday night.
I think we can all agree that.
That was the problem, the way I understood it, is if Billy Bob was running for sheriff, the sign could stay up for X amount of time, but if Billy Bob was a realtor or a general contractor that was working on a building, it could stay up the same time or a longer time period or shorter time period. But the Reed guy was trying to hold church services, and the signs could only go up like on Friday evening and had to be down by Monday morning. So the problem was, he wasn't Billy Bob. If Billy Bob was sheriff, he could have a sign up. If Billy Bob was a contractor or a realtor, the sign could be up a longer time. But if Billy Bob was holding church services, he had to go up and back down with them over the weekend.
Right, and then
It's all content.
the local government's interest in regulation of signage has to be public safety. It's rather limited. You can't say, well, that the political sign is gonna be more disruptive or dangerous to traffic than the real estate sign. It's gonna be hard to make that argument. So it's gotta be tied to what in one of the Reed concurrences says, is that, you know, construction of the sign, the methodology, the height, the size, the duration of display, or whatever phrase they use, but that's what we've been using, is duration of display. Beyond that, what the sign says can't be considered and then have your ordinance survive strict scrutiny at an appellate level.
So I mean, if we just settle on a really strict time limit for temporary signs, define those clearly, and we might even be getting closer to what Mr. Parrish was describing, communities that have virtually no temporary signs at all. I mean,
I work in Martha's Vineyard, but I don't know.
Yeah, I have to say, I've already heard from folks out my way that have fruit stands and little markets and things like that, and they're very concerned about the impact of this revision to their signage.
Well, the other thing is that I've talked to Mr. Deacon's point with his ice cream stand. There are elections where you have 5 candidates that you want to support. And I am unwilling to tell my constituents that I would go against them supporting 5 distinct candidates, separate, in an election and having signs for them. So some people have said that they're upset with the number of signs that could be on someone's property, that it's too many. But I do think that currently, if you drive around the county and look now, I don't see a whole lot of people abusing that one thing. And I think if we pull it back to not 200 days to put, but 90, I think it's much more reasonable. That's just.
But if you pull it back to 90, that's 90 for the contractor, that's 90 for the realtor, that's 90 for everybody.
Yeah, you have to do it for
And
everybody.
it
then
is
they
a
have
hundred.
to be dated so that you can see when they want to.
Well, this ordinance requires the date of first display to be on, put a new date on the sign.
Right, and it is 100 days, and then it's, you can request an additional 100 days.
Right.
Yeah.
Which does seem long.
So I do want to, the current ordinance, you know, it's not very clear right now on temporary signs. And I tried to make that point on this slide. And so you can exceed 50 square feet in area or 10 feet in height. And 1 temporary sign shall be allowed, it doesn't say any parcels or per what, for a period of not to exceed 30, 3 consecutive days, which there's no way to know what a consecutive day is right now. If somebody pulled the sign in the middle of the night, stuck it back down in the same place, moved it 1 foot over, there's just no way to enforce that. And no temporary sign shall be allowed for more than 60 days per year.
Could be.
At any location for the purpose of advertising an opening, sale, or a special event. Okay.
It's content driven.
So, but what about all the other signs that aren't
Right.
advertising an opening or a special event? They can be up more than 60 days. So that implies the 30 is, you know, you can basically have a temporary sign now forever.
And people
And it's
do.
not enforceable, and people do. And so we're trying to have something that is enforceable with the date of first display on the sign. And that is very clear. If it's been more than X number of days after that date of first display, you're gonna have to pull it, and you know what you're gonna do? You're probably gonna cross off that date and you're gonna put a new date. But there's, you know, how else are you going to get around that and enforce that?
Well, to Mr. Frazier's point, what about real estate signs where someone's trying to sell a piece of property?
Well, and we do have a separate carve out that says that you're not allowed to have real estate signs for any specific amount of time because we can't talk about that. But if you have a parcel that's for sale, you can have a special temporary sign that is extra space for a parcel that's for sale while it's for sale. They could put Eat and Joe's on that sign if they want to. Or they more likely will put Buy My House. But we can't.
Buy my house and eat it?
Right. And we couldn't stop that.
One thing I'd like to do, just to tell you how I'd like to move along. You know, I come from the land of hay bales and hay bale signs and big farm fields and little towns, some that are quaint and some that are not. And so at least what I'm starting to do is look at other rural localities' sign ordinances, particularly those that have been updated in the wake of Reed v. Gilbert, to see if we can borrow some guidance from communities that have gotten it right. You know, the old adage, don't reinvent the wheel. So that's kind of what I want to do, because, I mean, to Mr. Carney's point, we've received a ton of public feedback, and while Mr. Curry is correct that our current ordinance cannot remain in place, I just want to make sure that what we eventually adopt is really well thought out. And so at least the way I want to approach it is just look at other localities that I know well and that I grew up around and see how they've approached these questions of hay bale or agricultural signage, that kind of stuff, not using agricultural materials for starters. And then also resort areas that are similar to Rappahannock County that do have a lot of tourism related activity, how they have allowed businesses to still flourish, but have also maintained the scenic vistas that draw the same tourists to those businesses. So there's a lot I think that we can accomplish, but there's also a lot that we need to sort out. And so I'm not feeling like we should be in a big rush. And certainly the Planning Commission, with some help from the Berkeley Group, and I don't believe the sign ordinance was necessarily a priority item for the Berkeley Group. I think they came in late in the process.
It was, and they reviewed the final drafts and provided comments.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think we've gotten a lot of good guidance from Gary and Art and the folks at the Berkeley Group, and obviously a lot of great input from our citizens. So I think we kind of owe it to our citizens in particular to each now think through a way to make this read cleanly and make it something that can actually be enforced, and then not lose sight of where we started, which is keep Rappahannock County beautiful while still allowing businesses to advertise and politicians to run for office and people to state their views on whatever they want to state their views on.
If I could, I'd like to take exception to the one thing you said there, because it really is sort of an illusion that's been built. We haven't received a lot of input from people that are opposed to it. We had the Rappahannock News printed an article that said after dozens of speakers, there were only 14 people that spoke that night, and 11 of them were opposed to the ordinance as it was. And out of that 11 people, some of those same 11 people sent us emails. Some of those same people are on these petitions. So there hasn't been a large turnout of opposition. I will take exception to that. There is some opposition, but they're the same people. And the same people over the years, I've watched it, and when I told the board this one time, they all come out, yeah, that's Frazier again. But then when Mr. Luke, as county attorney, said the same thing, they all said, wow, we hadn't really noticed that. But it was the same exact thing. And it's the same people on every one of these little groups. Whether it's the RLEP or it's this group or that group, they're the same people, but one is the chairman of this group, the other one's the president of that group. And it's the same people. No matter what the issue is, whether it's the sign ordinance or a bike trail or any other issue, it's the same people time and time again.
I think it's, I suppose it's, and I don't have a lot of experience in local government. For sure, I agree that there's a small subset of our community that's particularly active on matters of zoning or things like the sign ordinance or fire and rescue. We tend to hear the same voices frequently, but it's also a small county. And the other thing I would say is not having had a lot of experience in local government, I now have come to realize that to some extent there is a lobby out there, and that is one mechanism by which the views of a broader constituency, of course, are funneled to the people even at a local level who are making the decisions. So I agree with you that it might not be everyone in the county is expressing an opinion, but there is an active lobby, whether it's from RLEP or any other organization, and that, I think, is one mechanism by which opinions are expressed, and we can't simply discount that.
I'm not discounting them, I can say that we
No,
should, but if I could just interrupt just a second. Dave.
Sure.
The problem is a vast majority of the people just want to be left alone.
I agree with that too.
And that's why we don't see them. They just want us to leave them alone, get off their back, and, you know, I had somebody tell me that they didn't want to see these signs that say tomatoes. Well, that's a temporary sign because you don't have tomatoes to sell all the time.
Right.
And I don't really know how to figure that into stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, I know this sign ordinance has gotten some attention, and some people have spoken publicly about their concerns about duration, size, et cetera, temporary signs in particular. And I feel like the prudent thing to do is, and I'm just speaking for myself, what I would like to do is just think through it, look at other localities, try to bring some of these other communities' experiences to bear on our own, and then try to find a path forward, because right now it's just kind of jumbled, and that's not at all to discount or disrespect the efforts of the Planning Commission when I was on the Planning Commission, when Ms. Smith was on, and efforts of Art and Gary in this regard. I just think it's with us now, and we need to wrestle with it a little bit.
So when we're looking at other localities, could we all know the other localities to look through? Because my recollection is when this started, it was really only Chesapeake had redone their zoning ordinance. Have there been others since then that we should look
There must
through?
be, yeah, I mean, I know.
And I would say Chesapeake was draconian. We don't
Green
want
did
that.
last
We
month.
really don't want that. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Green did last month.
There are several.
Added it,
Yeah, so if we could all get on the same page with the reading material, that would be great.
Sure.
I think we need to, I'll just say, once again, for the record, I think zoning and land use issues should be on the evening agenda because they are of greater interest to the general public. And I want that to be where they're placed on the agenda in perpetuity. I've always felt this way. I did vote through this agenda today because I know I will be the only one that will say that. But that is where they belong. A lot of people work during the day. And one of the things we're hearing from people is that, you know, they want to come out and be heard, put it on the evening agenda so we can get through this. Otherwise, we're going to have a bunch of daytime meetings, have a hearing in the evening to get it through, and we're going to be back to square one. So please, there's no reason that it shouldn't have been on the agenda for tonight. We have 2 small term hearings tonight to get through. We could have worked on this for several hours this evening, and instead it's crunched into the afternoon. That's not right.
I fully support that. I'm happy to, and for the duration of getting this done, put it on the evening. I'm happy to do that.
And not every month is like that. Lord knows last month wasn't like that. But when we have an opportunity like tonight, it's a missed opportunity to get through this.
Good point.
And I think we have received so much feedback, and it seems fairly consistent on these 5 or 6 issues, that if we can focus our energies on the ones that people are so outspoken about.
But fairly consistent, it's the same people.
And I would just say the other part of this that I always, and I'll be brief, I'll wrap up my comments, that I think is critical to concluding this exercise is that we complete the loop and we write back to the people that we've received comments from, and we undertake an education component to share the information as we move forward through the process. And that we respond to the groups that we've heard from, and we also put the information out as press releases so that as we continue to go down this road together, we all end up at the same place at the end of the road, or at least a relatively close proximity thereof. And I would also just add that the Planning Commission, as you know, is now taking on ordinance work. I have stressed to the Berkeley Group how very critical it is for the people of Rappahannock County to have a trackable end product for their ordinances so that when we do our final review, that we'll be able to see what went in, what came out, where it ended up, and not kind of be putting the pieces together in our spec.
I just want to say that you guys work really hard on this, and I think that this is really difficult. This is, it's a lot to cram, and I think staff, you guys did a fantastic job of having to constrain what we had to do. And what I'm basically hearing is that having grown up in this county is that there just aren't a whole lot of signs, and I don't think people have a large appetite for seeing more. And so we just have to balance that and figure that out. To Mr. Deakins' point, businesses need signs.
Yeah.
Fine.
We live in a food desert.
Yeah, and so, and he's got ice cream. So, you might consider that.
There was a lot of things, but not coffee or ice cream.
Definitely not coffee.
Thank you.
Gotta have coffee.
Just, am I to respond to letters?
I
think I can do that.
I think
I'm
I-
in a good
Maybe
position.
follow further work of this board.
I think it would be helpful if there's an easy way to search counties that have done new ordinances in the past 6 months or a year.
It's called Google.
But in your,
Or reach out to.
Our code
Big Bell.
publisher, I can search across all codes for that code publisher, but I can try to institute government search too.
I mean, just to,
Or
for
go to
Steve's
the
comment,
planning, the AICP group.
trying to make sure we all have the same list as important.
I was just gonna go on a little vacation in northern Wisconsin to a community I had run. We can all go.
But are they home rule or are they Dillon?
Are there cheese curds?
Well, for sure, they should. And signs advertising them everywhere.
All right, so this is to be continued.
Yeah,
At the evening session.
Please.
I agree with you. Sounds good. I hadn't even thought about it. So I'm glad you
Well, Ms. Smith had brought it up.
No, I know that, but
I don't know how y'all forget. I feel like I should have recorded it by now.
well, I didn't forget, it's just, I look at the agenda and it's the agenda. I'm glad you keep an eye on this.
Classification and compensation study.
Yes, good afternoon again. I'm gonna skip to the meat of this. So I feel like we've made a lot of progress on this over the last couple of months. I've worked with the treasurer and the commissioner to refine and finalize the career ladder positions and job descriptions within those offices. And I wanna say that involved a lot of work on their part. Also, we established an additional career ladder position and job description within the Commonwealth Attorney's Office relative to the new position that was added. We have done further clarification and finalization of several maintenance and planning/zoning job descriptions, and have updated what was then the draft fiscal '23 pay scale with the draft fiscal '24 pay scale to reflect the statewide market increase of 5% across the board that was implemented by, I would wager to bet, every locality in the state, because the state offered the 5% increase. So off from the get-go, I'm not looking for the board's action on this evening. The proposed state budget that was to be acted on by the General Assembly today included a 2% increase effective December 1 for state-supported local employees. I don't know what the outcome of that discussion was today, but I also don't want to ask you to take action tonight and tie your hands on how you might be able to kind of cross-implement that with this, if there's a way to do that. And I don't know that there is at this point. That's more work to be done. But as a result of that work that has happened over the last couple of months, I shouldn't speak for them, but I've heard from both the treasurer and the commissioner that they are good with this as it stands now. I am actively continuing to work with the registrar on now developing career ladders for her office as well. Initially that wasn't the path that she wanted to take, but has now begun to go down that road. So, Mr. Curry, if you wouldn't mind bringing up the presentation. I'm going to skip the first few slides because this is all background information that you've seen multiple times before. It's here for folks who this might be their first time kind of digging into this. But if you would go to slide number 6. Yes, that. So these three options will be familiar to you. The dollar implementation will have changed a little bit because now we're talking about it being potentially effective October 1 instead of for the full year. But these are the options that were laid out by Baker Tilly to implement this study. The first was to move any employee who is currently below the minimum, whose salary is currently below the minimum of their new grade to that minimum. And the cost of that effective, if implementation is effective October 1, the all-in cost, salaries and related benefits, would be $62,000. That translates to $82,000 for a full year. And for context, recall that we have $157,500 budgeted in fiscal '24 for this implementation. Option 2 is to move employees to the minimum of their grade or provide a 2% increase, whichever is greater. This option impacts every employee, whereas option 1 moves just those whose salaries are currently below the minimum to the minimum. This cost, effective October 1, is $102,000, or for the full fiscal year, going forward, would be $135,000 per year. Option 3 is to move to the minimum and add a 0.5% increase on top of the minimum salary for each year of service in the employee's current position. So if an employee started here 10 years ago, and the first 7 years they were in position A, and now they're in position B, this would focus on the 3 years that they've been in position B and give them 0.5% credit on top of the minimum for each of those 3 years. The cost of that for implementation effective October 1 is $85,000, and derived for the full fiscal year would be $113,000. These next 2 options are brand new, and these came out of a conversation that I had with one of the constitutional officers who wanted to know how this would impact the employees in that office. And I committed that I would calculate that information and share the information with the board. And so option 4 is an iteration of the prior option, except instead of calculating that 0.5% increase for each year of service within their current position, it calculates it for each year of service within their total county service, regardless of the position. The cost there is $98,000 effective October 1, or $130,000 for the full fiscal year. And then the final option that we've calculated here is what if we took the pay scale that was presented by Baker Tilly. And in that pay scale, they have defined what the minimum salary is, the midpoint, and the maximum salary is for each position in each grade. What if we took that and derived a 30-year career scale, and then placed employees on that scale based upon their years of service with the county? So if somebody has 12 years of service with the county, derive 30 steps on that scale and put them on step 12 because they have 12 years of service. So I calculated that for each employee, and the cost, if implementation is effective October 1, is $195,000, or $265,000 for the full fiscal year. And again, budgeted for fiscal '24 is $157,500. So those are the various options. And I'm happy to calculate any other option you'd like to see.
And the registrar, the remaining shifts and changes probably don't push these numbers very far.
Not drastically far, no. And in the registrar's office, there's 1 employee, and that's why I can say with confidence it won't change these numbers drastically.
Right. So you just mentioned fiscal year '24, 157,000. Was that tied to option 5, or?
No, sir. That was the budget as a whole, and with that budget, the board can choose any of these options for implementation or any other option that you'd like for me to.
So going back a few years ago, I convinced you to put a placeholder in of that $150,000 to fund this when we got it done. And so you've done that.
I recall.
The extra $7,000 was the 5%.
Yes, was the 5%.
So we tried to when you adopted FY '24, you kept up with that 5% so that you would be better able to implement one of these options. We didn't know how much the options were going to cost at that time, so it's really just a bucket of recurring dollars
It is
for you to use. Yeah.
Because it's going forward, once adopted, that's how
Right,
much.
it's
how much-
inherent in the
yeah.
salaries at that point, yes, sir.
And that could grow as much as 5% every year or every other year based on.
Well, these years of 5% raises are very odd for most of us who've been in local government for many years, because we went years of 1s and 2s or nones for a long time, and then things have been strange recently, so I don't know what's going to happen in the future.
And these figures don't take into account the potential for another 2%.
That's correct.
Which will have revenue and expenses if, the state will give us the great gift of allowing us to give raises to our staff, school, constitutional officers, social services, and then give us a little bit of revenue to cover that. More for the
Right.
constitutional officers and social services and less for the school because of the LCI. But it's not all on us. It's just shared with the state.
One time.
No, that's recurring too. It's just they'll cover, I don't even want to say 1%. Probably might know.
Fraction.
A fraction.
So currently we have $157,000, excuse me, set aside to go towards one of these
To
options.
invest some way. It doesn't have to be one of these options. It could be any option that you.
Yeah,
Option
I could-
six.
Yes.
Yeah, and it could, you might look at
I
these
just
options
want-
to get an idea of how much certain actions cost, and then think, well, if we combine that with this, maybe it would come in the middle, or.
It's a mechanism.
I guess my bigger question, sorry, was that we're not paying for this study out of that money.
No.
That's
No,
separate.
no.
So we have 157.
It's
just for this.
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
When I first saw it as a budget line item, I thought it was about,
Okay.
because it says study, but
Yeah,
what
yeah.
it's just, it's a relative salary increases that would result from adopting whatever comes out of this.
And it's a placeholder in the Board of Supervisors budget, because we wouldn't know how to distribute it through the budget to the different
We
departments.
just got in the habit of setting that aside, knowing that we'd eventually be.
Well, we kind of thought we would do it, but then March 2020 happened, and then.
Went to the back burner.
But it's,
Well,
it's
I mean,
built,
we decided we're going to do pandemic for a while, and then we got off the pandemic, maybe, I don't know.
Bringing it back to
Yeah,
every election year. And in Virginia, that means every year we'll have a pandemic.
right.
so anyway, it's, that placeholder is there so that we don't end up
Yep.
with a huge surprise.
It's, right, it's paid, this is, $157,000 of this is paid for. You've paid for it. Now, you just have to decide, how do you invest those $157,000, or $100,000, or $200,000? I mean,
But it's not an action item for today.
no.
Yeah, we're just working.
But you're talking about making it effective October 1st. How would we do that if we don't know that?
The pays obviously are on the 15th or the 30th or 31st, and so if you took action at your next meeting on October 2nd, you could make that, if the board desired, you could make that effective October 1st, and it would be in the October 15th paycheck.
Well, first I want to say thank you so much for all the work you've done on this. I can't imagine how much work you've put into this. And you've talked to all the constitutional officers, and I just thank you for doing this.
You're welcome.
My question would be to you, after having worked with these numbers and worked with these folks, if you have a sense of where we're headed with this. We don't know, like Mr. Curry was saying, we don't know what's coming down the pike with mandatory pay raises and all the like, for instance, if we have 3%, 4%, year after year after year, I'm just trying to build a mental picture of what is sustainable.
Right, I understand. And so at the last board meeting, before options 4 and 5 were discussed with that constitutional officer, we were recommending option 3. And that is moved to the minimum and then a 0.5% increase for each year of service in the employee's current position. And so I would at this point recommend either option 3 or option 4. Because this exercise was to establish the pay scales that don't currently exist, based on the market, to get everybody on a relative playing field, one position, one office to another, and to then place employees who aren't currently on any pay scale on the pay scale. And I think either option 3 or option 4 meet those objectives.
And Bonnie and I discussed that we didn't think it was appropriate to use this vehicle to provide a level increase for people. This is about placing your employees in totally different jobs by using those 9 factors and somehow trying to compare somebody who works outside all day versus somebody who sits at a computer all day, and using those 9 factors, figure out where they should go on that pay scale. And yes, you can give cost of living increases anytime you want. This isn't the vehicle for that. This should be about that differentiation and aligning the different jobs the best you can into that structure.
This is foundational.
Which is why we don't recommend option 2.
Okay.
Got it.
This was a huge step, I think, and I know it took a lot of conversations, so appreciate the extra.
And I'm confident that all the folks that Bonnie has spoken with better understand the rationale why we would want to do this sort of thing.
Are we required to have one of these things?
No.
Is that something we don't talk about?
No, but it's a good idea. Is that a fair summary?
Standard practice.
Standard practice for sure. I'm sure there's words in the Code of Virginia somewhere about something like this.
We should.
Best practice.
All right, okay.
Is there any direction you have for us? Any other options that you want us to run to have available for you?
You overwhelm us with your analysis, and then you say, "Hey, if you can think of any other one." Like, really?
You thought of one, right?
No, it's hard for me to think outside of your already very thorough option-based
I feel like
analysis.
option 5 must have taken hours to crunch. That's a lot of data.
She loves spreadsheets.
I do love spreadsheets.
That's
For what it's worth. Yeah, just laying out the initial scale, that took a little while, but then putting people on that, once you have the scale built, it doesn't take long.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
So hopefully we'll have the final information the next time to incorporate the 2% from the state, if that's what the General Assembly adopted, and we can go from there.
And the governor approves it.
Thank you.
All
Can I
right.
ask you a question about the, so
Yes,
is
sir.
the budget finalized, or is that what you're saying, parts of the budget are not, in the state budget?
So the conference committee prepared a budget, gave it to the General Assembly. If I heard Dr. Grimsley right earlier, they both passed it through and approved it,
Right.
and now it's on the governor's desk. I don't know if I heard that correctly.
Okay, thank you.
It's a couple hundred pages long, so how any of them knew what was in
He'll
it.
just sign each page.
Yeah.
So there's a lot in there.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Oh, mountain speed display signs.
We'll make it real quick. Got the permit, ordered the stuff. You just voted to reallocate your contingency today. Pay for it.
Excellent.
Thank you. Commercial activity, Mr. Whitson.
Nothing new, at least in this part of the county to report. Obviously, the Rush River Commons project is really picking up steam. Hopefully it will be less disruptive now that it's going into a construction phase, get all the heavy excavation work. But yeah, I mean, just keeping an eye on that and that project, any effect on people kind of downstream, but all seems to be rolling along without too much disruption to people.
Commercial activity.
What are you talking about?
We just went through that.
Couldn't understand what he said then.
Oh,
Received the VDOT permit and ordered the equipment.
All right, upcoming September 21st meeting.
I just wanted to have a conversation, and I'm sorry the time is so crunched this afternoon, but I wonder how we're gonna, and we just received an email today, and I, in all honesty, haven't had a chance to read it thoroughly from the clearing, but I just want to make sure when we come out of this meeting on the 21st that we have a good end product that is worth the $60,000 that was spent on it, because I have a feeling most people don't think that current to date is money well spent.
Yeah, I think, you heard me ask several different ways. And I thought what we needed to at least do was, one, understand what this organization, the clearing, does, and I understand change management. But then what I asked several times really was, I think at least somewhat in sync with what you're saying, which is, what did we set out to do? What problem?
What's the game plan for the 21st?
But what I guess what I thought when I sat for my interview, I thought it was about everyone speaking frankly and openly about how to make this hybrid system work. And certainly there are operational concerns that people like us will have to work out in our emergency services coordinator. But I think it's more about kind of a soft kind of volunteer versus paid cultural question and territorial question and that kind of thing. And I thought that's what it was all about, but I might be wrong. I mean, if we were in a nutshell to say, what are we focused on in this exercise? I mean, I still don't really know what the thesis or the premise or and that's not to be critical, it would be helpful if I could hear that.
Yeah, I mean, my expectation going in, and what I remember when we voted to do the study, is that there would be input, and I thought logically that there would be context for the input, which to me was sorely lacking in the presentation that we received on the 21st was context for what they'd heard. And I reached back out to the clearing and I said, I believe you've made it a lot about personalities and that sort of thing, rather than the institutions, the governing documents, and looking at the history and a way forward for these organizations. And I don't really think that focusing on in less tangible things, like I felt like our personalities and intangibles, was productive. And I more than all else with this endeavor, I want to be productive.
But I think that those intangibles, I think, is kind of what I meant when I thought that, in fact, they were looking at, I mean, for lack of a better way of phrasing it, how do we all get along in this new environment where for ensuring that we have a service for people, we've put 8 people in 3 locations, and how is that system going to work, and how will it evolve going forward, and how do we protect our volunteer community in that process, and how do we serve our citizens? I thought that's kind of what we went in talking about, and so maybe if that's in fact where we were headed, then the intangibles, as you describe it, are sort of the questions about how do we get along, and maybe that's.
Well, if I could maybe anecdotal answer based on observation and experience. If I could, back when we started working on that service agreement that the county is using as a bludgeon right now over the volunteers' heads, we had a large turnout that day, and many long-term, highly respected volunteers stood up and said that they came prepared to throw the keys to the building on the table. And I told my colleagues at that time, I'm the only one left from that board, that they were qualified to do our jobs, because the only real qualification is getting elected. You don't have to know anything, you don't have to read anything, you don't have to do anything. You just got to be able to get elected. But we were not qualified to do their jobs, because they have qualifications that they've got to hold. There was a major difference. So I suggested that we put together this committee, and I put together, we had 2 supervisors. We had the county administrator, we had different fire and rescue people, And we had a local businessman, I called him up, he's no longer in the county, moved, and I said, we'd like to have you on the committee. He says, I don't know anything about fire rescue. I said, no, but you understand business. And it was him working with members of the group that came up with that. I've never heard of it because I didn't work with it, but what is that one forum that they were working with about chart accounts? So it was, trying to bring everybody together with similar bookkeeping methodology. And that same gentleman, he looked at the one sitting supervisor beside himself, and he looked at it and he said, I would really hate to be you and XYZ supervisor. He said, because the way that y'all have been acting, they probably have your addresses memorized. And when the call goes out, they could just easily roll over in bed. And yet, we come full circle and we're right back there again. Well, we don't have, enough respect for our volunteers. We hired a full-time emergency services coordinator that was used basically as a bulldog to go after people. That's what it appeared to be. So,
I don't agree with that
well,
assessment.
it doesn't matter if you don't agree with it. I said that. You
That's
can
cool.
say what you want to say.
Yeah, and I
But
will.
this is from my observation and from talking with the volunteers that will talk to me, and they may not talk to you on the same level.
That's fine. I just wanted to say, I hear you. I disagree with you. Coming from my perspective, that I did it out of an utmost due respect for the citizens of this county and the volunteers.
Did do what?
Just every action that I've taken on this board. Is that not what we're talking about? Oh, maybe I'm.
We were talking about the clearing, actually.
Yeah, I'm just saying where we are today. All the
Yeah,
actions
I'm
that I've
talking about
supported.
in general for the
Yeah.
last 3 or 4 years, it has been ugly.
I just want to say for the record, though, that I disagree and that I support our volunteers 110%. And I would never support someone bulldogging. I just don't.
Did you call into the clearing meeting?
No, I wasn't there. Remember?
Would you be able to listen to a recording of it, because I think that you will hear
Oh, yeah.
people talking about that, what Mr. Fraser's referring to.
I understand that. I have heard people say that about we're doing that. I'm saying from where I come from, though, I support our volunteers, and I don't view any action that I've taken as trying to go after them at all. And I would sit down with anybody and any volunteer, and I had people who disagree with me, and I've talked to them and say, hey, here's where I'm coming from. Which is, I wasn't at the clearing meeting. I don't know what the clearing folks were saying. But I definitely will, and I would be there on the
Yeah,
21st.
hopefully look through their presentation, because it was I mean, I kind of knew what to expect. I was surprised at how superficial it was, and I thought it was, unfortunately, as I said, rooted in intangibles, which is not a good place to be.
I think if folks will go back to the December 14th, it was Public Safety Committee meeting. On that, there was an agenda item for strategic plan for Rappahannock County Fire and Rescue. And that's, in my understanding anyway, when we got started on discussing the clearing, was we have an agreement that's a 5-year plan. And the quote is, county staff are working with a company that focuses on group dynamics, with which a scope is being developed to bring all interested parties together and work through shared interest in the development of a process to analyze, appropriate, and necessary future service delivery strategic plans. In my mind, the first meeting was just to get people to talk, and then the next meeting is to try to find out if we can get people that will talk and discuss the strategic focus on Rappahannock County Fire and Rescue.
Well, I mean, we're in it now. I asked the question, like, if we cancel or if we postpone, can we either get some money back or postpone so they can develop the materials better and maybe run it past us before they debut it to a larger audience? I mean, I don't want to waste a lot of time, energy, and goodwill on something that isn't going to work.
I mean, that's helpful what you just read, so.
I just wanted to remind us how we got there.
Yeah. It would have been helpful, I think, if the people who were running the meeting the other night, it's referred back to that because it really was, to me, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it was just like, it's helpful to say, why are we all here?
Well,
Because it became a free-for-all. It was like people were talking about who's going to be chief of company for. Other people were like, board of supervisors are overreached. I don't think that was, it wasn't the clearing has brought together everyone to get mad at everyone else in the room to talk about whatever came to mind, which is what it devolved into. Which is why I was hoping, like, if somebody could just define, here's why we're here, here are the parameters of what we're talking about, and it sounds like getting along in a new environment over a 5-year planning period is the goal.
Well, I didn't finish my little anecdote. I sidetrack myself sometimes. But how we started that, at one meeting I told you about, that was the first meeting.
Mm-hmm.
We were a group appointed by the board of supervisors. And then we had people that sat out there, and we met here, we met at the library, we met at different fire halls. And the group kind of grew incrementally, but we let everybody, we just kept sitting around a table as if they had been appointed, but they really weren't. But they all had an equal voice at that table. And they were not getting along until Mr. Glennie told them one time, it was at the Amosville Fire Department when we had a meeting there, when everybody was kind of looking at everybody in an adversarial way because some people were getting more money from the county than others. But for instance, Flint Hill was trying to run a dual system, fire and rescue, and they were getting less money reimbursed to them each year than Sperryville that was just running a fire department. That doesn't seem fair. And it probably wasn't fair, but the only way that you can do that is look at the money and then make the determinations and take personalities out of it. So when we came to the agreement that we're going to be asking for 100% reimbursement of operational expenses, then it doesn't matter anymore. If Sperryville gets more money than Flint Hill, if they're spending more money, then maybe they should. But if Flint Hill was spending more money, or 9, Chester Gap, is all this foible? Anyway, so the thing is, everybody's got to be treated equally with respect. We just did that about the signs we were talking about. But we couldn't do that with fire and rescue. We went away from a system of talking to people, and I don't know why.
What recently, and I don't want to drag this out too long, but what recently can you point to that where we disrespected or worked against our volunteer system?
Disrespect or went against the volunteer system.
I mean, what you just said, you're implying that we've somehow been doing incorrect things, and I'd like to know what you're talking about specifically.
That's larger. That would be a larger conversation than maybe you giving me a specific where you have.
Well, you just made a comment about.
I'm telling you what they say.
Oh, okay.
What they tell me, and they probably won't talk to y'all because, unfortunately, they don't trust y'all.
Okay. And I don't know who they are.
They are the volunteers that get out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
They largely don't trust the county government.
Okay. You're part of the county government.
Yeah. They trust me because I don't act like it.
All right, so for this line item,
I just wanted to have a conversation. I know it's sort of an in for a penny, in for a pound situation, but I also wanted to make sure that I brought it up in case there was an opportunity to position us for a better outcome on the 21st.
I think at a minimum, if the folks from the clearing could just try their best up front before we dive in, say, here's where we started, this is what we're trying to accomplish, this is what we did, this is where we are now, and the purpose of tonight's meeting is the following. Because it's all very amorphous, and Ms. Smith said, a lot of intent. Maybe it's the group dynamics hook in the December 14th meeting minutes that you cited, maybe that's what they're focused on, I just don't know. I'm happy to participate, I just would like to know what the purpose, the fundamental purpose and goal are.
All right. Thank you.
Drought conditions.
I'm sorry.
Drought.
Drought conditions.
Drought conditions, thank you. I asked for that because the creeks are dry. The hay is burning up, it's not even growing. And the board may have to have a discussion with the Commissioner of Revenue, because if she's gonna try and enforce her sleigh-like regs where you get 2 cuttings of hay this year, it ain't gonna work.
Yeah, that's a good point.
There's a farmer, and I'm so sorry I forget the name, over in Flint Hill. He's already feeding his winter hay supply. He doesn't have enough water, and he's hauling livestock off to sell it. So he's putting himself out of business right now. That's what he's doing.
I talked to a farmer in my district who was doing the exact same thing, and then told me that Greg Williams has been hauling hay over to Rockingham County to feed cows over there.
Well, if you look at this drought line, and I really appreciate Mr. Curry putting it on there, what prompted me to think about it, I had some time in the truck to think about stuff. I drove over to Marshall, and Marshall's in worse shape than Amosville. And Amosville, if I hadn't put this one water in as spring fed, I would be hauling water or, running water out of my well to feed what few livestock I've got. And it's bad over there. So when you look at that line, how it cuts across, I don't know exactly how it affects our county here, but I do know about the guy up there. If I knew his name, I wouldn't say it anyway, but I don't have his authority to do that. But I mean, it's bad. It's very bad.
Just one practical thing that came out of the Public Safety Committee last night is, by unanimous vote, we did recommend that we, and Mr. Curry can talk about our legal authority to do so, that the recommendation is that we put in place a temporary burn ban in the county. And we can do that, and again, Mr. Curry can explain, I think,
Mr. Goff and I have had some discussions on it. We do have an ordinance section that speaks to this. It's not functional because it allows me to enact a burn ban to be ratified by the board upon recommendation of the forest warden, and the Department of Forestry tells me we don't make recommendations. So maybe they did when the ordinance was written. No, they don't now.
But they don't anymore, so it's on us.
I know that there is enabling state legislation somewhere. I'm not sure how direct of a line it is for our locality, based on what parts of the building code and fire prevention code we've adopted. But the boards can do whatever they want to do.
I think we should.
I do think that the weather is going to turn from a fire prevention concern based on the data available to me, both short and long term, but there's no guarantee of that. I know at the Public Safety Committee meeting they did suggest, and it was a motion by Chief Burke and seconded by Darren Stevens. Two of our neighbors have just done this. Of course, they are on that bullseye. That's Warren County and Fauquier County. And they suggested that be done in a way that could be relieved without having to wait for a board meeting or something like that.
Yes,
Mr. Kirk,
discretion of the county
and you
administrator.
would consult with those two individuals who recommended that we do this with Chief Burke and Darren Stevens.
Sounds good.
So we wouldn't put a time limit on it, we'd invoke it now, and then when it's through consultation with them, Mr. Curry can lift it.
And if we get some good soaking rains.
Yeah, I was just looking, looks like we might get a little bit of rain next week.
And how will we, I guess, from a practical perspective, how will we get the word out that there's a burn ban in place?
Media partners and website, what do we do?
How do you enforce it?
Well, that's the part we probably don't.
If you say it's under the Code of Virginia, it's a Class 3 misdemeanor, and so if the officer issues a uniform summons, cites the county ordinance, and brings them into court, and the judge is going to say, "What are you smoking? Something?" Because the code says that the governor's got to declare it. And our code says that the forest warden has to declare.
Recommended.
recommended, and then that empowers county administrator to issue. So how are we gonna enforce it? That's my question to you.
At this point.
I got the code section here. Thanks,
Enforcement
Gary,
is
for that too.
It's not how to hire.
Yeah.
It's more awareness rather than enforcement, in my opinion, but I do see what you're saying, Mr. Goff.
I think the town of, excuse me, my throat. The town of Front Royal has, I don't know what it is today, but they had a volunteer water rationing or restriction, use. So maybe we could just put out like a public notice. Conditions are dry, don't burn.
Yep.
Yeah.
And then we need to take a look.
Yeah, that's something we'll follow up on. Actual chase down that.
Well, there is a provision too, that we can recover the cost of putting out the fire if somebody violates the state code. But it still requires, this article shall not be effective until the governor, upon recommendation of the state forester, proclaims such a condition to exist in this Commonwealth or any part thereof.
We can adopt broader burning ordinances that restrict open burning, require permits for burns of certain sizes. I don't necessarily think we want to go down that road. But in those sections, enabling sections, probably is where others derive their authority to clamp down when they need to. We just
Can we enact a temporary burn ban and leave it at that and not worry about
penalties?
Yeah.
That's about, in my opinion, all you're gonna be able to do, because.
Well, I think we ought to do
it's
something.
challenged.
I think we have to.
When I try to enforce it, I'm gonna lose, I'm just telling you, it's, we don't have any. We don't have any.
I move that we, impose in Rappahannock County a temporary burn ban due to the extreme drought conditions, and in so doing, set no time limit, but authorize the county administrator to confer with Chief Burke and Mr. Stevens, who are both members of the Public Safety Committee, to lift that burn ban at such a time that is no longer needed.
Effective when?
Today, immediately now.
Could you, on sixth respect, make an amendment so that it's clear that the burn ban would be for outdoor burning within 300 feet of inflammable material? Because that's what the state code reads.
Within 300, it's a ban on any outdoor burning within 300 feet of flammable material.
Flammable, it says, and it mentions grasses, forests, and it says nearer than 300 feet from any such forest lands, brushlands, or fields containing dry grass or other flammable material.
Okay, 300 feet.
That's what 10.1.1158
Okay.
means.
Amended.
We have a motion, do I have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed?
I will definitely rely on that.
Yep.
Thanks for adding that on to the agenda.
Yep, thank you.
Yep.
Good move.
Board committee reports. Building committee.
Building committee. We're still working with the historic architect that the board has authorized the building committee to undertake hiring, so that we can get these building envelopes repaired, the old church, the jail, and hopefully the courthouse very soon after that. We're awaiting, I think, a final report from him.
I've got a preliminary review, provided some comments, and I expect to have the final tonight.
Okay, so that's in the works. I guess the big thing is on September 11th, the building committee will be meeting with the judge and several other stakeholders, the clerks. I hadn't heard back from Mr. Goff. Hopefully he'll be able to attend, and the sheriff will be there.
Oh, Tuesday.
Monday.
Monday.
2:30.
Well, Monday, yes, when court lets out, yes, I'll be
Okay, so we're gonna hopefully kick off the get together with all the stakeholders, and we'll just get input, because we had preliminary input, but the state regulations on courthouse security, courthouse building, courthouse renovations, all that underlying the same document is that we put together a committee like that. So we hopefully we'll have some good direction coming out of that.
Good. Recreational Facilities Authority. Yeah, it was. We had a good meeting, talked about the mural and the history behind the mural. It's a really well thought out design. And I don't remember the date that getting started, but it sounds like kids are involved, and I look forward to seeing it when it's done. Then they'll see if they want to extend it, because she's got no other funds. The only thing I remember that really came out of that meeting was we were discussing the mural. They've done anything on the playground. Public Safety Committee.
Sure. So we had our quarterly meeting last night. I think we've already, incidentally along the way today, covered a number of the items that were most substantive, including the wrong way driving issue on 211, and hopefully a pilot study that would involve something like pavement painting and directional arrows as a deterrent to wrong way travel, for starters. I realize the VDOT bureaucracy is always working against us in this regard, but I think if we do a pilot in an area probably over in your neck of the woods, most likely, where they can focus in on more of those wrong way driving incidents than other places.
That's where it's happening.
Yeah.
I mean, it's where it's reported, but it goes all the way, I don't know how they do it, how in the world you can do it, but they go all the way down through Amosville, and you wind up down here by Thunder Square, so driving on the wrong side.
Yeah. So that, I think that's an important step forward. We did wrestle a little bit more with, you'll recall, the zoning ordinance amendment regarding traffic safety and two-way traffic for large events, and so there were some recommendations that we'll bring back to the board when we decide to take that up again. But that's going to be a tough one. I mean, I think at the Public Safety Committee, the same doubts and questions were raised at the Planning Commission in here as well. But I mean, we did come up, a couple of members of the Public Safety Committee did add some helpful input. So when we get back to addressing that, we'll take account of their comments. And then Ms. Donahue and I are working on hopefully what could be a really exciting AED deployment project in the county. And so it's in the initial stages, but it's something that might involve private funding and maybe as a catalyst for going out and getting foundation money to deploy widely AEDs in the county, and then map them through our dispatch system so that people know where they are and people who are qualified to respond to sudden cardiac events can get to them and then take them to where they're needed. So it's very initial stages, but I think something that could really benefit our volunteers and our fire and rescue community and our citizens in general. So there will be more to report on that later.
Don't the volunteers already carry them in the ambulances?
They do, but the idea, I've heard from a number of business owners, we really benefit from an AED just in static locations. Yeah, for example, Chief Burke in Sperryville, he carries an AED with him when he's out and about, but the idea would be to put them also in strategic locations, so between deputies' cars and emergency vehicles and static locations, you have good coverage. And it seems like there is a movement afoot where businesses and churches are starting to put them in place. So the idea is to expand that network of fixed AEDs and then map it through our dispatch system so that we can use them effectively as a supplement to our fire and rescue system. So,
Thank you. Rules Committee. Planning Commission update.
We met and you'll see our work attached to the zoning administrator's report.
Fire Levy Board.
We did not meet, we'll be meeting later this month, 20th.
I've received the last notice to further today.
Okay.
So that'll be noticed tomorrow. Till 7.
I would be remiss if I did not mention that the planning commission is meeting with the Berkeley group next Wednesday evening at 6 o'clock here.
And the newspaper somehow conflated that to be a joint meeting. I don't know how they came to that understanding, but it's not. It was somewhere in the paper last time. A couple of people have asked me about it.
All right, anything else under information reports and correspondence given our timeline? We've got closed sessions.
So regarding that closed session, trying to squeeze it in, or you can kick it to the end of the night if you want to.
I prefer to kick it to the end of the evening session myself.
Could we kick
Ralphie's
it?
gonna be here.
Could we kick it to next month or no?
It's been kicked for 2 months now.
You don't know what next month is going to be. It could be busier than this month. But hey, you guys make the rules.
Are you available this evening?
I really was not to be, but.
You just have to be sitting here at 7 o'clock.
Right.
I mean, if you want to wait a month, you wait a month.
Get on with it.
Okay.
You got other matters.
Yeah, matters presented by the board, we can. Mr. Fraser, do you have anything?
No.
Can we revisit this at the end of the evening meeting?
Or we just agree, I have no others.
The only thing I have is I did attend the VACO meeting in Richmond and requested to be added to their Agricultural and Rural Affairs Committee. And I got that appointment letter, and I just felt like somebody from here should be on that committee.
Good, thank you for that.
All right, moving into closed meeting.